The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli. Dedication to the magnificent Lorenzo di Piero de' Medici. People who want to win the favor of a prince usually bring him gifts that they consider the most valuable, or that they know he really enjoys. That's why you often see horses, weapons, gold cloth, precious stones, and similar fancy items being given to princes, fitting for their status. Wanting to show my dedication to you, I looked for something special to share and realized that what I treasure most is the knowledge I've gained about the actions of great people. This knowledge comes from years of experience with current events and a deep study of history. After thinking about it carefully for a long time, I've put it all together in a little book that I'm now sending to you. Even though I might think this work isn't quite worthy of your attention, I really hope you'll be kind enough to appreciate it. I can't offer you a better gift than the chance to quickly understand everything I've learned over so many years, through lots of challenges and dangers. I haven't dressed it up with fancy words or elaborate sentences, or any extra frills that many people use to make their work look good. I want it to be valued either for its honesty or for the importance of the topic itself. I don't agree with those who think it's presumptuous for someone from a low or humble background to discuss and decide on the matters of princes. Just like artists who draw landscapes, position themselves in the plains to observe the mountains and high places, and climb mountains to view the plains. To truly understand the nature of the people, you need to be a prince, and to understand the nature of princes, you need to be one of the people. So, Your Magnificence, please accept this small gift in the spirit I'm sending it. If you read and think about it carefully, you'll see how much I want you to reach the greatness that your fortune and qualities promise. And if, from the height of your greatness, you occasionally look down to these lower places, you'll see how unfairly I'm dealing with a lot of ongoing bad luck. The Prince. Chapter 1. Different types of principalities and how they're acquired. All states and powers that have ruled or currently rule over people are either republics or principalities. Principalities are either hereditary, where the ruling family has been in power for a long time, or they are new. New territories are either completely new, like Milan was for Francesco Sforza, or they're like additions to the existing hereditary state of the prince who acquired them, similar to how the Kingdom of Naples was for the King of Spain. These territories, once acquired, are either used to living under a ruler or enjoying their freedom. They can be gained through the ruler's own efforts, with help from others, by luck, or through skill. Chapter 2. Concerning hereditary principalities. I'm going to skip talking about republics, since I've covered them in detail elsewhere. Instead, I'll focus on principalities. I'll follow the order I mentioned earlier and talk about how these principalities should be governed and maintained. I'll say right away that it's easier to hold on to hereditary states where people are used to the ruling family than to manage new ones. For a prince with average abilities, it's usually enough to stick to the traditions of his ancestors and handle situations wisely as they come up to keep his position. This is unless he's overthrown by some extraordinary and overwhelming force, and if that does happen, he'll likely get his state back if something bad happens to the usurper. Take the Duke of Ferrara in Italy, for example. He wouldn't have been able to fend off the Venetians in 84 or Pope Julius in 10 if he hadn't been firmly established in his territory for a long time. A hereditary prince has fewer reasons and less need to upset people, so he's likely to be more loved. Unless he has some major flaws that make people hate him, it's reasonable to expect that his subjects will naturally like him. Over time, as his rule becomes more established, the memories and reasons for wanting change fade away, because one change often leads to the desire for another. Chapter 3. Concerning mixed principalities. But the challenges come up in a new principality. First off, if it's not completely new but is instead part of a larger state, which you could call composite. The changes mainly stem from a common difficulty in all new principalities. People often switch rulers willingly, hoping for a better situation, and this hope leads them to take up arms against the current ruler. However, they end up disappointed because they realize they've gone from bad to worse. This also happens due to another natural and common necessity. A new prince always ends up burdening those who have accepted him with his army and countless other hardships that he has to impose on his new territory. So, when you take over a territory, you end up making enemies out of everyone you've wronged in the process. Plus, you can't keep the friends who helped you get there because you can't meet their expectations, and you feel obligated to them, so you can't take strong actions against them. Even if you have a powerful military, you still need the locals to be on your side when you enter a new area. For these reasons, Louis XII, King of France, quickly took over Milan, but just as quickly lost it. The first time, all it took to kick him out was Lodovico's own forces. The people who had let him in realized they weren't getting the benefits they hoped for and wouldn't put up with the new ruler's bad behavior. It's true that when you take back rebellious areas a second time, they're not as easy to lose again. The prince uses the rebellion as a chance to punish troublemakers, get rid of suspicious people, and strengthen his hold on the weakest spots. So to make France lose Milan the first time, it was enough for Duke Lodovico to stir up trouble on the borders. But to make him lose it a second time, the whole world had to be rallied against him, and his armies had to be defeated and driven out of Italy, which happened for the reasons mentioned above. Even so, Milan was taken from France both the first and second time. We've already talked about the general reasons for the first time. Now let's look at the reasons for the second time. We'll also explore what resources he had and what anyone in his position could have used to hold on to his new territory more securely than the King of France did. Now, when someone adds new territories to an old state, those new areas are either from the same country and speak the same language, or they're not. If they are, it's easier to keep control over them, especially if they're not used to governing themselves. To keep them secure, you just need to get rid of the ruling prince's family. Since the two groups will keep their old ways and aren't too different in customs, they'll live peacefully together. We've seen this happen in places like Brittany, Burgundy, Gascony, and Normandy, which have been part of France for a long time. Even if there's a slight language difference, their customs are similar, so the people can easily get along. If the person who annexed them wants to keep them, they should remember two things. First, make sure the former ruler's family is gone. Second, don't change their laws or taxes. This way, they'll quickly become a unified part of the old state. But when you take over a state where the language, customs, or laws are different, it can be tough, and you'll need some good luck and a lot of effort to keep control. One of the best and most effective ways to do this is for the person who has taken over to actually go and live there. This makes their position more secure and long-lasting, just like it did for the Turks in Greece. Even with all the other strategies they used to hold on to that state, if they hadn't settled there, they wouldn't have been able to keep it. Being there in person means you can spot problems as they start and fix them quickly. But if you're not around, you only hear about issues when they've become big, and by then it's too late to fix them. Plus, your officials won't be able to exploit the country. The people will be happy because they can easily reach out to the ruler. This way, if they want to be good, they have more reasons to love him, and if they want to cause trouble, they have reasons to fear him. Anyone trying to attack that state from the outside has to be extremely careful. As long as the ruler is living there, it's really hard to take it from him. A better approach is to establish colonies in one or two strategic locations that act as keys to the state. You either need to do this or maintain a large number of cavalry and infantry there. Setting up colonies doesn't cost a prince much because he can send people there with little or no expense and keep them there. This only upsets a small number of citizens from whom he takes land and houses to give to the new settlers. Those who are upset end up poor and scattered, so they can't really harm him. Meanwhile, the rest of the citizens, who aren't affected, are easy to keep calm and are careful not to make mistakes, fearing they might end up like those who lost their property. In short, these colonies are not expensive. They are more loyal, cause less harm, and those who are harmed, being poor and scattered, can't retaliate. It's important to note that people should either be treated very well or completely crushed, because they can get revenge for minor injuries, but not for severe ones. So any harm done to someone should be so significant that you don't have to worry about them seeking revenge. Keeping soldiers there instead of setting up colonies costs a lot more because you have to spend all the state's income on the garrison. This turns the acquisition into a loss, and it makes many people upset because it harms the entire state. As the garrison moves around, everyone experiences hardship and becomes hostile. These people, even when defeated on their own land, can still cause trouble. For all these reasons, having such guards is as pointless as having a colony is beneficial. A prince who controls a country different from what I've described should become the leader and protector of his weaker neighbours while weakening the stronger ones. He must ensure that no foreign power, as strong as himself, gets a foothold there by accident. This often happens when discontented locals, driven by ambition or fear, invite them in, as we've seen before. The Romans were brought into Greece by the Aetolians, and in every other place they entered, it was the locals who let them in. Typically, when a powerful outsider enters a country, all the subject states flock to him because of their hatred for the current rulers. So he doesn't have to work hard to win them over. They naturally align with the new power. He just needs to make sure they don't gain too much power and authority. With his own forces and their support, he can easily control the stronger ones and remain the master of the country. If he doesn't handle this well, he'll quickly lose what he's gained, and even while he holds it, he'll face endless challenges and problems. The Romans in the regions they took over followed a smart strategy. They sent out colonies and kept good relations with smaller powers without letting them get too strong. They kept the bigger powers in check and didn't let any strong foreign powers take control. Greece is a good example of this. They stayed friendly with the Achaeans and Aetolians, humbled the kingdom of Macedonia, and pushed Antiochus out. Despite the Achaeans and Aetolians being helpful, the Romans never let them grow more powerful. Philip couldn't persuade the Romans to be his allies without first being humbled, and Antiochus couldn't convince them to let him keep any control over the land. The Romans acted like any wise ruler should, thinking about not just current problems but also future ones, preparing for them with all their might. When you see issues coming, it's easy to fix them, but if you wait until they're right in front of you, it's often too late because the problem has become too big to handle. It's like doctors say about a fever. At first, it's easy to cure but hard to notice. Later, it's easy to notice but hard to cure. The same goes for state affairs. When you spot problems early, which only wise people can do, you can fix them quickly. But if you ignore them and let them grow until everyone can see them, there's no solution left. So the Romans, seeing trouble ahead, dealt with it immediately. They avoided letting issues escalate into war because they knew war can't be avoided, only postponed to someone else's benefit. They preferred to fight Philip and Antiochus in Greece rather than in Italy. They could have avoided both conflicts, but they chose not to. They didn't agree with the common saying of their time, "Let's enjoy the benefits of the moment," but instead relied on their own courage and wisdom. Time moves everything along and can bring both good and bad, just as bad can bring good. Now, let's shift our focus to France and see if they've done any of the things we've talked about. I'll talk about Louis and not Charles, because his actions are the most noteworthy, as he held on to Italy for the longest time. You'll notice that he did the exact opposite of what should be done to keep a state made up of different parts. King Louis was brought into Italy because the Venetians were ambitious and wanted to get half of Lombardy with his help. I won't criticize the king's decision because he wanted to establish a presence in Italy, and he didn't have any allies there, especially since every door was closed to him due to Charles's actions. So he had to accept whatever friendships he could find, and he would have succeeded quickly if he hadn't made some mistakes in other areas. Once the king took over Lombardy, he quickly regained the power that Charles had lost. Genoa surrendered, the Florentines became his allies, and the Marquis of Mantua, the Duke of Ferrara, the Bentivogli, the Lady of Forli, and the lords of Faenza, Pesaro, Rimini, Camerino, Piombino, along with the Lucchese, the Pisans, and the Sienese, all of them reached out to become his friends. That's when the Venetians realized how reckless they had been, because in trying to secure just 2 towns in Lombardy, they ended up making the king the ruler of 2/3 of Italy. Think about how easily the king could have kept his position in Italy if he had just followed the rules mentioned earlier and kept all his allies safe and secure. Even though he had a lot of allies, they were weak and scared. Some were afraid of the church, others of the Venetians. Because of this, they would have always had to side with him, and through them, he could have easily protected himself against the stronger powers. But as soon as he got to Milan, he did the opposite by helping Pope Alexander take over the Romagna. He didn't realize that by doing this, he was weakening himself, losing friends, and alienating those who had supported him, while at the same time he was making the church stronger by giving it more power. After making this first mistake, he had no choice but to keep going down that path. He ended up having to come to Italy himself to stop Alexander's ambitions and prevent him from taking over Tuscany. As if it wasn't enough to have boosted the church and lost his friends, he decided he wanted the kingdom of Naples. So, he split it with the King of Spain. Instead of being the main power in Italy, he brought in a partner. I understand that the ambitions and frustrations of that region needed an outlet. But instead of leaving someone loyal to him as king, he kicked him out and put someone in who could eventually kick him, Louis, out too. The desire to acquire things is really natural and common, and people always try to do it when they can, and for that they get praised, not blamed. But when they can't do it and still try, by any means, that's when it's foolish and blameworthy. So if France could have attacked Naples with its own forces, it should have done that. If it couldn't, then it shouldn't have split it up. And if the division France made with the Venetians in Lombardy was justified because it gave them a foothold in Italy, this other division deserves criticism because it didn't have the same excuse of necessity. So Louis made these 5 mistakes. He got rid of the smaller powers, he made one of the bigger powers in Italy stronger, he brought in a foreign power, he didn't settle in the country, and he didn't establish colonies. These mistakes wouldn't have been enough to hurt him if he hadn't made a 6th one by taking away the Venetians' territories. If he hadn't strengthened the church or brought Spain into Italy, it would have been reasonable and necessary to weaken them. But since he did those things first, he should never have agreed to their downfall. The Venetians, being strong, would have always kept others from making moves on Lombardy. The Venetians wouldn't have agreed to that unless they could become the rulers there themselves. Plus, the others wouldn't want to take Lombardy from France just to give it to the Venetians, and they wouldn't have had the guts to go against both France and the Venetians. And if someone says King Louis gave up Romagna to Alexander and the kingdom to Spain to avoid war, I'd respond, based on the reasons mentioned earlier, that making a mistake to avoid war is never a good idea. War isn't really avoided, it's just postponed to your disadvantage. And if someone else brings up the promise the king made to the Pope to help him with his plans in exchange for the annulment of his marriage and the title for Rouen. I'd say I'll address that later when I talk about how princes should keep their promises. So, King Louis lost Lombardy because he didn't follow the rules that others have used when taking over countries and wanting to keep them. There's nothing miraculous about this. It's actually quite logical and natural. I talked about this in Nantes with Rouen, when Valentino, who was usually called Cesare Borgia, the son of Pope Alexander, took over the Romagna. Cardinal Rouen mentioned to me that Italians didn't understand war, and I replied that the French didn't understand politics. By that, I meant they wouldn't have let the church become so powerful. In fact, it's clear that the church and Spain's power in Italy was caused by France, and France's downfall can be blamed on them. From this, we can draw a general rule that almost always holds true. If you help someone else become powerful, you'll end up ruined. This is because their rise to power is either due to cunning or force, and both make the person who helped them feel uneasy. Chapter 4. Why the Kingdom of Darius, conquered by Alexander, didn't rebel against Alexander's successors after his death. Given the challenges people face in maintaining a newly acquired state, some might wonder how Alexander the Great managed to become the ruler of Asia in just a few years and then died before things were even settled. It seems reasonable to think that the whole empire would have rebelled. Yet his successors managed to hold on to power and only had to deal with issues that came from their own ambitions. I'd say that historically, principalities have been governed in two main ways, either by a prince with a group of servants who help him run the kingdom as his ministers, thanks to his favor and permission, or by a prince and barons who have their status due to their family lineage, not because the prince granted it to them. These barons have their own lands and subjects who see them as lords and have a natural loyalty to them. In states governed by a prince and his servants, the prince is held in higher regard because there's no one else in the country seen as above him. If people obey someone else, it's only because they're acting as a minister or official, not because they have any special loyalty to them. In today's world, we can look at the examples of the Turkish government and the King of France. The entire Turkish monarchy is run by one ruler, and everyone else is just his servants. He divides his kingdom into regions called sanjaks, and sends different administrators there, swapping them out whenever he wants. On the other hand, the King of France is surrounded by a long-established group of lords who are respected and loved by their own people. These lords have their own rights, and the king can't take those away without risking trouble. So if you think about these two types of governments, you'll see that it's really tough to take over the Turkish state, but once you do, it's pretty easy to keep control. The reason it's hard to take over the Turkish kingdom is that you can't rely on the local princes to help you, and you can't expect the people close to the ruler to revolt and support you. This is because, as mentioned earlier, his ministers are all basically slaves and are really hard to corrupt. Even if you manage to corrupt them, they can't really sway the people to your side. So, if you're planning to attack the Turks, you need to remember that they'll be united, and you'll have to depend more on your own strength than on any internal rebellion. But once you've defeated the Turks and beaten them so badly that they can't rebuild their armies, the only thing to worry about is the ruler's family. If you eliminate them, there's no one left to fear because the others don't have any influence with the people. Since you didn't rely on them to win, you shouldn't worry about them afterward either. The opposite is true in kingdoms like France. You can easily get in by winning over some baron, because there are always people who are unhappy and want change. These people can help you get into power and make victory easy. But if you want to keep control afterward, you'll face endless challenges from both those who helped you and those you defeated. It's not enough to just eliminate the prince's family, because the remaining lords will lead new uprisings against you. Since you can't satisfy or eliminate them all, you'll lose control of the state whenever the chance arises. If you think about how Darius's government worked, you'll see it was a lot like the Turkish kingdom. So all Alexander needed to do was defeat him in battle and then take over the country. Once he won and Darius was killed, Alexander had a firm hold on the state for those reasons. If his successors had stuck together, they could have ruled peacefully and easily, because any unrest in the kingdom was only caused by their own actions. But it's impossible to maintain such calm in countries set up like France. That's why there were so many rebellions against the Romans in places like Spain, France, and Greece. These areas had lots of principalities, and as long as people remembered them, the Romans never really had a firm grip. However, as the Roman Empire grew stronger and lasted longer, people forgot about those principalities, and the Romans finally became secure rulers. Later, when they fought among themselves, each leader could claim parts of the country based on the power they had established there. With the old ruling families wiped out, only the Romans were recognized as rulers. When you think about these things, it's no surprise how easily Alexander kept control of the Asian Empire, or why others like Pyrrhus struggled to hold on to their conquests. It's not really about how skilled the conqueror is, but more about the lack of consistency in the conquered state. Chapter 5. How to govern cities or principalities that had their own laws before being taken over. When you take over states that are used to living under their own laws and in freedom, there are 3 ways to keep control. First, you can destroy them. Second, you can move there yourself. And third, you can let them keep their own laws, collect taxes, and set up a friendly oligarchy. This kind of government, created by the ruler, knows it can't survive without his support, so it does everything it can to help him. So, if you want to keep control of a city that's used to freedom, it's easier to do it with the help of its own citizens than any other way. Take the Spartans and the Romans, for example. The Spartans took over Athens and Thebes and set up an oligarchy there, but they eventually lost control. On the other hand, the Romans managed to keep control of places like Capua, Carthage, and Numantia by dismantling them, and they didn't lose them. The Romans tried to control Greece like the Spartans did, by allowing it to be free and keep its own laws, but they didn't succeed. To maintain control, they had to dismantle many cities in the region, because honestly, there's no safe way to keep control without destroying them. If someone takes over a city that's used to being free and doesn't destroy it, they can expect to be overthrown by it. That's because the city will always rally around the idea of liberty and its old privileges, which time or benefits will never make them forget. No matter what you do, they won't forget their name or privileges unless they're broken up or scattered. They'll seize every opportunity to rally around them, just like Pisa did after being under Florentine control for 100 years. When cities or countries are used to living under a prince and his family is wiped out, they find themselves in a tricky spot. They're used to following orders, but don't have the old prince around anymore, so they can't agree on picking a new leader from among themselves, and they don't really know how to govern themselves. Because of this, they're usually slow to take up arms, making it easier for a new prince to win them over and secure control. On the other hand, republics have more energy, stronger feelings of hatred, and a bigger desire for revenge, which means they won't easily forget their past freedom. So the safest approach is either to destroy them or to live there. Chapter 6. Concerning new principalities gained through personal efforts and skills. Don't be surprised if, when I talk about brand new principalities, I bring up the best examples of rulers and states. People usually follow the paths set by others and try to imitate their actions, but they can't completely stick to those paths or reach the same level of power as those they copy. A smart person should always follow the paths of great individuals and try to imitate those who have been the best. This way, even if they can't match their abilities, they'll at least come close. They should be like skilled archers who, when aiming for a target that seems too far away, know the limits of their bow's strength. They aim much higher than the target, not to reach that height with their strength or arrow, but to use that high aim to hit the target they want to reach. In new territories with a new ruler, the challenge of maintaining control depends on how skilled the ruler is. If someone becomes a ruler from an ordinary background, it usually means they have either talent or luck. One of these factors will help them overcome many challenges. However, the ruler who depends less on luck tends to be more secure in their position. It's also easier for the ruler to manage things if they have no other territories and are required to live there personally. Let's talk about those who became leaders through their own skills and not just luck. Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, Theseus, and others like them are great examples. Even though we might not discuss Moses in the same way since he was carrying out God's will, he still deserves admiration for being chosen to speak with God. When we look at Cyrus and others who built or took over kingdoms, they're all impressive. If we examine their actions and how they lived, they stand up well next to Moses, even though he had such a great teacher. When we look at what they did, it's clear they didn't rely on luck, except for the opportunities that came their way. These opportunities gave them the chance to shape things as they saw fit. Without those opportunities, their talents might have gone unnoticed, and without their talents, the opportunities would have been wasted. Moses needed to find the Israelites in Egypt enslaved and oppressed by the Egyptians, so they would be willing to follow him to freedom. Romulus had to leave Alba and be abandoned at birth to become the king of Rome and the founder of the nation. Cyrus needed to encounter the Persians unhappy with the rule of the Medes, who had become weak and indulgent after a long period of peace. Theseus wouldn't have been able to prove his skills if he hadn't found the scattered Athenians. These opportunities made these men successful, and their great abilities allowed them to seize the moment and elevate their countries to fame and honor. People who become leaders through brave actions like these individuals find it tough to gain power, but once they have it, it's easier to hold on to. The challenges they face in gaining power often come from the new rules and methods they have to introduce to establish and secure their government. It's important to remember that there's nothing more challenging to start, more risky to carry out, or more uncertain in its success than leading the way in creating a new order. This is because the innovator faces opposition from everyone who benefited from the old ways, and only lukewarm support from those who might benefit from the new ways. This lack of enthusiasm partly comes from fear of the opponents, who have the law on their side, and partly from people's skepticism, as they don't easily trust new things until they've been around for a while. So when those who oppose have the chance to attack, they do so aggressively, while the supporters defend half-heartedly, putting the leader at risk along with them. So if we really want to dive into this topic, we need to ask whether these innovators can stand on their own or if they have to rely on others. In other words, to achieve their goals, do they need to pray and hope, or can they use force? If they have to rely on prayers, they usually fail and don't achieve much. But if they can rely on themselves and use force, they're rarely in danger. That's why all armed prophets have succeeded, while the unarmed ones have been defeated. Besides the reasons already mentioned, people are unpredictable. It's easy to convince them, but hard to keep them convinced. So it's crucial to have a plan in place, so that when they stop believing, you can make them believe again by using force. If Moses, Cyrus, Theseus, and Romulus hadn't been armed, they couldn't have kept their rules in place for long, just like what happened to Fra Girolamo Savonarola in our time. He was quickly ruined with his new ideas once people stopped believing in him, and he had no way to keep his supporters loyal or convince the skeptics. So people like this face big challenges in achieving their goals. All their dangers come while they're rising to power, but with skill, they can overcome them. Once they do, and those who doubted them are dealt with, they'll start to earn respect and will continue to be powerful, secure, honored, and happy. I want to add a smaller example to these great ones. It still has some similarities to them, and I hope it will be enough for all similar cases. It's Hiero of Syracuse. This guy went from being an ordinary citizen to becoming the ruler of Syracuse, and he didn't owe anything to luck except for the opportunity. The people of Syracuse, feeling oppressed, chose him as their leader, and later he was rewarded by being made their ruler. He was so capable, even as a regular citizen, that someone who wrote about him said he only needed a kingdom to be a king. He got rid of the old army, organized a new one, ended old alliances, and formed new ones. With his own soldiers and allies, he could build whatever he wanted. So while he went through a lot of trouble to gain power, he had very little trouble keeping it. Chapter 7. Concerning new principalities gained through the help of others or by luck. People who become leaders purely by luck, going from being regular citizens to rulers, find it easy to rise but hard to stay on top. They don't face many challenges on their way up because their rise is swift, but they encounter many once they're at the peak. This happens to those who are given power either through money or the favor of someone who grants it, like what happened to many in Greece in the cities of Ionia and the Hellespont, where Darius made them rulers to secure and glorify his empire. The same goes for those emperors who, through the corruption of soldiers, went from being citizens to rulers. These people are simply elevated by the goodwill and fortune of the person who raised them up, two of the most unpredictable and unstable things. They also lack the necessary knowledge for the role, because unless they are exceptionally talented and capable, it's unreasonable to expect them to know how to lead, having always lived as private citizens. Moreover, they can't maintain their position because they don't have loyal and trustworthy forces to support them. States that suddenly rise to power, like anything else in nature that is born and grows quickly, often don't have solid foundations or connections. This means that the first challenge or crisis can easily topple them. However, if the people who unexpectedly become leaders are really skilled, they understand that they need to be ready right away to hold on to what luck has given them. They must build the foundations that others had already established before they became leaders. When it comes to becoming a ruler through either skill or luck, I want to bring up two examples we all know: Francesco Sforza and Cesare Borgia. Francesco, through his own efforts and great skill, went from being an ordinary person to becoming the Duke of Milan, and he managed to hold on to what he had gained with a lot of hard work without much difficulty. On the other hand, Cesare Borgia, known by the people as Duke Valentino, gained his position while his father was in power, but lost it when his father's influence waned. This happened even though he did everything a wise and capable person should do to secure his position in the territories that others' efforts and luck had given him. As mentioned earlier, if someone hasn't set up their foundations first, they might be able to do it later with great skill, but it will be challenging for the architect and risky for the building. So if we look at all the steps the Duke took, it's clear he built a solid foundation for his future power. I don't think it's unnecessary to talk about them because I can't think of better advice for a new ruler than to follow his example. And if his plans didn't work out, it wasn't his fault, but rather the result of incredibly bad luck. Alexander VI wanted to expand his son, the Duke's power, but he faced a bunch of immediate and future challenges. First off, he couldn't figure out how to make his son ruler of any state that wasn't already part of the church. Even if he was okay with taking land from the church, he knew the Duke of Milan and the Venetians wouldn't agree, since places like Faenza and Rimini were already under Venetian protection. On top of that, he noticed that the military forces in Italy, especially those who might have helped him, were in the hands of people who would be worried about the Pope gaining more power, like the Orsini and the Colonnesi and their allies. So he needed to shake things up and create some chaos among the powers to secure control over part of their territories. This was pretty easy for him because the Venetians, for their own reasons, were open to bringing the French back into Italy. Not only did he not oppose this, but he also made it easier by annulling King Louis's previous marriage. So the king came into Italy with the help of the Venetians and Alexander's approval. As soon as he was in Milan, the Pope got soldiers from him to make a move on the Romagna, which surrendered to him thanks to the king's reputation. The Duke, having taken over the Romagna and defeated the Colonnesi, wanted to hold on to that and push further. But he was stopped by two issues. His forces didn't seem loyal, and he was unsure about France's support. He worried that the Orsini forces he was using wouldn't stick by him, and not only might they stop him from gaining more, but they might even take what he had already won. He also feared the king might do the same. He got a hint about the Orsini's loyalty when, after capturing Faenza and moving to attack Bologna, he saw them dragging their feet. As for the king, he got a sense of his intentions when, after taking the Duchy of Urbino, he moved on Tuscany, and the king made him back off. So, the Duke decided he couldn't rely on the forces and luck of others anymore. First, he weakened the Orsini and Colonna factions in Rome by winning over their supporters, who were gentlemen. He made them his own gentlemen, paid them well, and gave them positions and commands based on their rank. In just a few months, their loyalty shifted entirely to the Duke. After that, he waited for the right moment to take down the Orsini, having already scattered the supporters of the Colonna family. This opportunity came soon, and he seized it effectively. The Orsini, realizing that the Duke and the Church's rise to power was a threat to them, called a meeting at Magione in Perugia. This led to the rebellion in Urbino and unrest in the Romagna, creating numerous dangers for the Duke, all of which he overcame with French support. Once he restored his authority, he didn't want to risk it by relying on the French or other external forces. So he resorted to cunning strategies and was so good at hiding his intentions that with the help of Signor Pagolo, whom the Duke kept close with gifts of money, clothes, and horses, the Orsini were reconciled. Their naivety led them into his trap at Senigallia. After eliminating their leaders and turning their followers into his allies, the Duke built a strong foundation for his power, controlling all of Romagna and the Duchy of Urbino. As the people began to appreciate their improved situation, he won them over completely. This strategy is noteworthy and worth imitating, so I didn't want to leave it out. When the Duke took over Romagna, he found it was being run by weak leaders who were more interested in exploiting their people than governing them. This led to a lot of division, with the region plagued by theft, fights, and all sorts of violence. Wanting to restore peace and respect for authority, the Duke decided it was necessary to appoint a strong governor. So he promoted Messer Ramiro d'Orco, a quick and ruthless man, giving him full power. Ramiro quickly brought peace and unity with great success. However, the Duke later realized that giving someone so much power might not be a good idea, as it could make him unpopular. So he established a court of judgment in the region, led by an excellent president, where all cities had their representatives. Knowing that the previous harshness had made him unpopular, the Duke wanted to clear his name and win over the people. He wanted to show that any cruelty was not his doing, but was due to the minister's natural harshness. Using this as a cover, he had Ramiro executed one morning and left his body in the square at Cesena with a block and a bloody knife beside him. The brutality of this scene left the people both satisfied and shocked. But let's go back to where we started. I'm saying that the Duke, now feeling strong enough and somewhat protected from immediate threats by having armed himself his own way, and having mostly defeated nearby forces that could harm him if he wanted to continue his conquest, had to think about France next. He knew that the king, who realized his mistake too late, wouldn't support him. From this point on, he started looking for new allies and tried to play nice with France during their campaign towards the Kingdom of Naples against the Spaniards who were besieging Gaeta. He intended to protect himself from them, and he would have done so quickly if Alexander had lived. This was his approach to the current situation. Looking ahead, he was worried that the next pope might not be friendly and could try to take away what Alexander had given him. So he came up with 4 strategies. First, he aimed to eliminate the families of the lords he had overthrown, removing any excuse for the Pope to act against him. Second, he worked on gaining the support of the influential people in Rome so he could use their help to keep the Pope in check. Third, he sought to sway the college to his side. Fourth, he wanted to build enough power before the Pope died so he could handle any immediate threats on his own. By the time Alexander passed away, he had achieved 3 of these goals. He had managed to kill most of the lords he had ousted, with only a few escaping. He had won over the Roman elite, and he had the largest faction in the college. For further expansion, he planned to take control of Tuscany, as he already held Perugia and Piombino, and Pisa was under his protection. Since he no longer had to worry about France, the French had been driven out of Naples by the Spanish, making both sides eager to stay on his good side, he set his sights on Pisa. After that, Lucca and Siena quickly fell in line, partly due to their dislike and fear of the Florentines. The Florentines would have had no way to stop him if he had continued to succeed as he was the year Alexander died. He had gained so much power and reputation that he could stand on his own, relying solely on his own strength and skills, rather than on luck or the support of others. But Alexander died just 5 years after he first picked up the sword. He left the Duke with only the Romagna region firmly under control, while everything else was up in the air, caught between 2 powerful enemy armies, and he was gravely ill. Despite this, the Duke was bold and capable, and he knew exactly how to win people over or deal with them if necessary. He had laid such strong foundations in such a short time that if he hadn't been burdened by those armies, or if he had been healthy, he would have overcome all his challenges. You can tell his foundations were solid because Romagna waited for him for over a month. In Rome, even though he was barely hanging on, he was secure. And while the Baglioni, the Vitelli, and the Orsini might have come to Rome, they couldn't do anything against him. Even if he couldn't make the Pope someone he wanted, at least he could ensure that someone he didn't want wouldn't be elected. But if he had been healthy when Alexander died, everything would have turned out differently for him. On the day Julius II was elected, he told me that he had thought of everything that might happen when his father died and had a plan for it all, except he never expected that when it happened, he would be on the brink of death himself. When I think about everything the Duke did, I can't really blame him. In fact, like I mentioned before, I think he's a great example for anyone who rises to power through luck or the support of others. He had big dreams and a strong spirit, and he couldn't have acted any differently. It was only the early death of Alexander and his own illness that stopped him from achieving his goals. So if someone wants to secure their new position, make friends, win over people either by force or cleverness, be loved and feared by the public, respected by soldiers, eliminate threats, shake up the old ways, be both strict and kind, generous and noble, get rid of unreliable troops and build a new army, and maintain strategic friendships with other leaders, they should look no further than this man's actions as a guide. The only thing he can really be blamed for is the election of Julius II, which was a bad choice. As people say, even if he couldn't get a pope he liked, he could have stopped others from becoming pope. He should never have agreed to elect any cardinal he had wronged or who might fear him if they became pope. People hurt others out of fear or hatred. Among those he had wronged were San Pietro ad Vincula, Colonna, San Giorgio, and Ascanio. The rest, except for Rouen and the Spaniards, would have had reason to fear him if they became pope. The Spaniards were safe because of their ties and obligations, and Rouen because of his influence, since France had connections with him. So above all, the Duke should have made sure a Spaniard became pope, and if not, he should have supported Rouen instead of San Pietro ad Vincula. Anyone who thinks that new favours will make people forget old wrongs is mistaken. That's why the Duke made a mistake in his choice, and it ultimately led to his downfall. Chapter 8. Concerning those who have gained power through evil means. A person can become a ruler from an ordinary background in two ways, and neither can be fully credited to luck or talent. Still, I feel it's important to talk about them, even though I could go into more detail when discussing republics. These methods are when someone rises to power through some wicked or shady means, or when they become a leader with the support of their fellow citizens. For the first method, I'll explain with two examples, one from the past and one from more recent times. Without going too deep into it, I think these examples will be enough for anyone who might need to follow them. Agathocles, the Sicilian, became king of Syracuse from a humble and lowly background. This guy, the son of a potter, lived a pretty notorious life, despite all the ups and downs he faced. However, he was so skilled both mentally and physically that when he joined the military, he climbed up the ranks to become the praetor of Syracuse. Once he was in that position, he made a calculated decision to become the ruler by force, without owing anything to anyone. He teamed up with Amilcar, the Carthaginian, who was fighting in Sicily with his army. One morning, he called a meeting with the people and the Senate of Syracuse, pretending to discuss matters related to the Republic. At a prearranged signal, his soldiers killed all the senators and the wealthiest citizens. With them gone, he took control of the city without any civil unrest. Even though he was defeated twice by the Carthaginians and eventually besieged, he not only managed to defend his city, but also left some of his men to protect it while he took others to attack Africa. In a short time, he lifted the siege of Syracuse. The Carthaginians, in a desperate situation, were forced to negotiate with Agathocles, leaving Sicily to him and settling for control of Africa. So if you look at what this guy did and how smart he was, you'll see that luck didn't really play a part. He got to the top, as mentioned earlier, not because anyone did him any favours, but by working his way up in the military, facing tons of challenges and dangers along the way. He held on to his position through even more risky situations. But let's be clear, it's not talent to kill your fellow citizens, trick your friends, or lack faith, mercy, and religion. These tactics might get you power, but not respect. Still, if you consider Agathocles' bravery in facing and getting out of tough spots, along with his strong will to endure and overcome hardships, it's hard to see why he shouldn't be considered as impressive as the most famous leaders. However, his brutal cruelty and endless wickedness stop him from being celebrated as one of the best. What he accomplished can't really be credited to luck or brilliance. In our time, during the reign of Alexander VI, Oliverotto da Fermo, who had been orphaned many years earlier, was raised by his maternal uncle, Giovanni Fogliani. When he was young, he was sent to fight under Pagolo Vitelli, so he could learn the ropes and hopefully achieve a high rank in the military. After Pagolo passed away, Oliverotto served under Pagolo's brother, Vitellozzo. Thanks to his sharp mind and strong body, He quickly became a top figure in his field. But he found it unsatisfying to serve under others, so he decided, with the help of some citizens of Fermo, who preferred the control of their country over its freedom, and the Vitelleschi family, to take over Fermo. He wrote to Giovanni Fogliani, saying that after being away for so long, he wanted to visit him and his hometown and check out his inheritance. Even though he hadn't worked to gain anything but honor, he wanted the citizens to see that his time hadn't been wasted. So he planned to arrive with 100 horsemen, his friends and followers, and asked Giovanni to ensure he was welcomed with respect by the people of Fermo. This would not only honor him, but also Giovanni, who had raised him. Giovanni made sure to give his nephew all the attention he deserved, ensuring he was warmly welcomed by the people of Fermo. He even hosted him in his own home. After spending a few days there and setting up his sinister plans, Oliverotto threw a grand banquet, inviting Giovanni Fogliani and the leaders of Fermo. Once the food and festivities were over, Oliverotto cleverly steered the conversation towards serious topics, discussing the power of Pope Alexander and his son Cesare and their ventures. Giovanni and the others joined in the conversation, but Oliverotto quickly suggested that such matters should be talked about in a more private setting. He led them to a room where Giovanni and the other citizens followed him. As soon as they were seated, soldiers emerged from hiding and killed Giovanni and the others. After these murders, Oliverotto got on his horse, rode through the town, and trapped the chief magistrate in the palace. The terrified people had no choice but to obey him and establish a government with him as the leader. He eliminated anyone who opposed him and strengthened his position with new civil and military rules. During the year he ruled, not only was he secure in Fermo, but he also became a threat to his neighbors. His downfall would have been as challenging as Agathocles if he hadn't been outsmarted by Cesare Borgia, who captured him along with the Orsini and Vitelli at Senigallia, as mentioned earlier. So 1 year after committing this betrayal, he was strangled along with Vitellozzo, whom he had admired for his bravery and wickedness. Some people might wonder how someone like Agathocles, after committing countless betrayals and acts of cruelty, could live safely in his country for so long, defend himself from outside enemies, and never face conspiracies from his own citizens. This seems puzzling, especially since many others who used cruelty couldn't even maintain control during peaceful times, let alone during war. I think this comes down to whether harsh actions are used wisely or poorly. We can call them wisely used if we can say anything good about something bad, when they're done all at once, are necessary for security, and aren't continued unless they benefit the people. Poorly used harsh actions are those that, even if they start small, grow over time instead of decreasing. Those who follow the first approach can, with help from either divine or human sources, soften their rules somewhat, like Agathocles did. It's impossible for those who follow the other approach to keep their power. Mr. Bird suggests that this word probably gets closer to the modern equivalent of Machiavelli's idea when he talks about crueltà, rather than the more obvious cruelties. So it's important to point out that when someone takes over a state, they should carefully consider all the tough actions they need to take and do them all at once, rather than spreading them out over time. This way, people won't be constantly unsettled, and the leader can calm them down and win them over with positive actions. If a leader does the opposite, either because they're scared or getting bad advice, they'll always have to be on guard, and they can't trust their people or gain their loyalty because of the ongoing harm. It's better to do all the difficult things at once, so they're less noticeable and less offensive, while positive actions should be given out gradually to make their impact last longer. Above all, a prince should live among his people in a way that no surprises, whether good or bad, force him to change. If tough times come and you need to act, it's too late for harsh actions, and gentle ones won't help because people will see them as something you were forced to do, and no one will feel grateful for them. Chapter 9. Concerning a civil principality. Now, moving on to the other point, when a leading citizen becomes the ruler of their country, not through wickedness or extreme violence, but with the support of their fellow citizens, this is known as a civil principality. You don't necessarily need exceptional talent or luck to achieve this, but rather a clever approach. So a principality like this is gained either through the support of the people or the support of the nobles. In every city you'll find these two distinct groups, and because of this, the people generally don't want to be ruled or oppressed by the nobles, while the nobles want to rule and oppress the people. From these opposing desires, one of three outcomes usually emerges in cities: a principality, self-government, or chaos. A principality is established either by the people or by the nobles, depending on who gets the chance. When the nobles realize they can't stand up to the people, they start promoting one of their own, making him a prince so they can pursue their ambitions under his protection. On the other hand, when the people see they can't resist the nobles, they also elevate one of their own to be a prince, hoping his authority will defend them. A ruler who gains power with the help of the nobles has a harder time maintaining control than one who rises with the support of the people. This is because the former has many around him who see themselves as equals, making it tough to govern or manage them as he wishes. In contrast, a ruler who gains power through popular support finds himself mostly alone, with few around him who aren't ready to follow his lead. On top of that, you can't really keep the nobles happy through fair means without hurting others. But you can keep the general public happy because their demands are more reasonable. The nobles want to dominate, while the people just don't want to be dominated. Plus, a prince can never really protect himself from a hostile public because there are just too many of them, but he can protect himself from the nobles since there are fewer of them. The worst a prince might face from an unhappy public is being abandoned by them, but from unhappy nobles, he has to worry not only about being abandoned, but also about them rising against him. Nobles are usually more strategic and clever in these matters, and they tend to act quickly to save themselves and gain favors from whoever they think will win. Moreover, a prince has to live with the same people all the time, but he can manage without the same nobles. He can make and break them as he wishes, giving or taking away their power whenever he feels like it. To make this point clearer, let's say that nobles can generally be seen in two ways. They either fully align themselves with your success, or they don't. Those who do align themselves and aren't greedy should be respected and appreciated. For those who don't align themselves, there are two possibilities. They might not do so because they're timid or naturally cautious. In that case, you should still make use of them, especially if they give good advice. This way you can honor them when things are going well and not worry about them when things aren't. However, if they avoid aligning with you because they're ambitious and self-serving, it's a sign they're more focused on themselves than on you. A leader should be wary of such people and treat them as potential enemies, because in tough times, they'll likely contribute to your downfall. So, if someone becomes a leader with the support of the people, they should make sure to keep them happy, which is pretty easy since the people just don't want to be oppressed. But if someone becomes a leader against the people's wishes, with the help of the nobles, they really need to work on winning the people over, and they can do this by protecting them. People tend to be more loyal to someone who treats them well when they were expecting the opposite. This way, the people will quickly become more devoted than if they had helped him rise to power in the first place. A leader can earn their love in many ways, but since these depend on the situation, I won't go into specifics. However, I must emphasize that it's crucial for a leader to have the people's support. Otherwise, they have no security when things go wrong. Nabis, the prince of the Spartans, managed to hold off attacks from all of Greece and a victorious Roman army, defending both his country and his rule. To overcome this challenge, he only needed to secure himself against a few individuals. But this wouldn't have been enough if the people were against him. Don't let anyone dismiss this by using the old saying, "He who builds on the people builds on the mud," because that only applies when a regular citizen relies on the people, thinking they'll save him when he's oppressed by enemies or authorities. In those cases, people often find themselves disappointed, like the Gracchi in Rome and Messer Giorgio Scali in Florence. However, a prince who has established himself as described above, someone who can lead, is brave in tough times, doesn't lack other important qualities, and keeps the people motivated with his determination and energy, will never be let down by them. It will be clear that he has built a strong foundation. These principalities face danger when transitioning from a civil to an absolute form of government. Princes can either rule directly or through officials. When they rule through officials, their government is weaker and more unstable because it relies entirely on the goodwill of those citizens appointed to official positions. During turbulent times, these officials can easily undermine the government through scheming or open rebellion. The prince can't exercise absolute power during such chaos because the citizens and subjects, used to taking orders from officials, aren't inclined to obey him in the midst of confusion. In uncertain times, there will always be a shortage of trustworthy people. A prince can't rely on what he observes during peaceful times when citizens need the state because everyone agrees with him then. They all make promises, and when danger seems far away, they all claim they would die for him. But in troubled times, when the state needs its citizens, he finds very few willing to help. This situation is even more dangerous because it can only be tested once. Therefore, a wise prince should ensure that his citizens always need the state and him in every situation, so he will always find them loyal. Chapter 10. How to measure the strength of all types of principalities. When looking at the nature of these principalities, it's important to consider another point: whether a prince has enough power to rely on his own resources in times of need, or if he always needs help from others. To make this clear, I would say that those who can rely on their own resources are the ones who can gather enough men or money to raise an army and face anyone who attacks them. On the other hand, those who always need help are the ones who can't confront the enemy in open battle and have to defend themselves by hiding behind walls. We've already talked about the first scenario, but we'll revisit it if it comes up again. In the second scenario, the best advice is to encourage such princes to stock up and strengthen their towns, and not to try defending the countryside. Anyone who fortifies their town well and manages the affairs of their subjects as previously mentioned, and will be mentioned often, will never be attacked without serious caution. People generally avoid challenges where they can see difficulties, and attacking someone with a well-fortified town who isn't hated by their people is not an easy task. The cities in Germany are completely independent. They don't own much land around them and only follow the emperor's orders when it suits them. They aren't afraid of the emperor or any nearby power because they are so well fortified that everyone thinks capturing them would be a long and tough task. They have proper moats and walls, plenty of artillery, and always keep enough supplies in public storage for a year's worth of food, drink, and fuel. Additionally, to keep the people calm and the state stable, they always provide work for the community in jobs that are vital to the city's life and strength, which support the people. They also value military training and have many rules to maintain it. So, a prince with a strong city who hasn't made himself hated won't be attacked, or if someone does attack, they'll just end up embarrassed. Plus, since things in this world are always changing, it's almost impossible to keep an army in the field for a whole year without running into problems. Some might say that if people have property outside the city and see it getting destroyed, they won't stay calm, and a long siege along with their own interests will make them forget about their prince. To that, I say a strong and brave prince can handle these challenges by sometimes giving his people hope that the bad times won't last long, other times making them fear the enemy's cruelty, and skillfully dealing with those subjects who seem too daring. Moreover, when the enemy arrives, they're likely to immediately burn and destroy the country, while the people are still fired up and ready to defend it. This is exactly why the prince shouldn't hesitate. Over time, as people's spirits cool down, the damage will already be done. Illnesses will have set in, and there won't be any way to fix it. At that point, people are even more willing to rally around their prince, especially since he seems to owe them now that their homes have been burned and their belongings destroyed in his defense. People naturally feel connected by the help they give as much as by the help they receive. So, if everything is thought through carefully, it won't be hard for a wise prince to keep his citizens loyal from start to finish, as long as he consistently supports and defends them. Chapter 11. Concerning church-based principalities. Now let's talk about church-based principalities. The tricky part is getting control of them in the first place, because they're usually gained through skill or luck, and you can keep them without needing either. They're backed by the long-standing rules of religion, which are so powerful that these principalities can be maintained no matter how their leaders act or live. These leaders have territories they don't have to defend, and subjects they don't really govern. Even though their territories are unprotected, they're not taken away. And even though their subjects aren't really managed, they don't mind and don't want or know how to break away. These principalities are the only ones that are truly secure and content. But since they're supported by forces beyond human understanding, I won't say more about them. They're elevated and maintained by God, so it would be arrogant and reckless to try to analyze them further. Still, if anyone were to ask me how the Church has gained such significant power in worldly affairs, considering that before Alexander, Italian rulers, not just the ones called potentates, but every baron and lord, no matter how minor, didn't think much of its temporal power. Yet now even the King of France is intimidated by it, and it has managed to push him out of Italy and defeat the Venetians. Although this might be obvious, I think it's worth reminding ourselves of it a bit. Before Charles, King of France, headed into Italy, the country was controlled by the Pope, the Venetians, the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and the Florentines. These leaders had two main concerns. One, that no foreign power should enter Italy with military force, and two, that none of them should grab more territory. The ones they worried about the most were the Pope and the Venetians. To keep the Venetians in check, all the others had to unite, like they did to defend Ferrara. To keep the Pope in line, they relied on the Roman barons, who were split into two factions, the Orsini and the Colonnesi. These factions always had a reason to cause trouble, and with weapons in hand right under the Pope's nose, they kept the papacy weak and powerless. Even if a bold pope like Sixtus came along, neither luck nor wisdom could free him from these issues. The short tenure of a pope also contributed to this weakness. In the 10 years, which is about how long a pope usually reigns, it's tough to weaken one of the factions. If, for instance, one pope almost wiped out the Colonnesi, another would come along, hostile to the Orsini, and would support their enemies, but wouldn't have enough time to take down the Orsini. This is why the pope's temporal powers weren't highly regarded in Italy. Later on, Alexander VI came to power, and he was the pope who really showed how a pope with both money and military might could succeed. With the help of Duke Valentino, and thanks to the arrival of the French, he accomplished all those things I mentioned earlier about the Duke's actions. Even though his goal wasn't to make the church more powerful, but to boost the Duke, what he did actually ended up increasing the church's influence. After he died and the Duke's downfall, the Church inherited all of his efforts. Pope Julius came later and found the Church in a strong position, controlling all of Romagna, with the Roman barons weakened and the factions eliminated, thanks to Alexander's actions. He also discovered new ways to gather money that hadn't been used before Alexander's time. Julius not only followed these methods but improved on them. He aimed to take Bologna, defeat the Venetians, and drive the French out of Italy. All these plans succeeded, and he gained even more respect because he did everything to strengthen the Church rather than any individual. He kept the Orsini and Colonnesi factions under control as he found them. Even though they sometimes wanted to cause trouble, he relied on two things: the Church's power, which intimidated them, and not allowing them to have their own cardinals, who were the source of their conflicts. When these factions have their cardinals, they don't stay quiet for long because cardinals encourage factions in and out of Rome, forcing the barons to support them, leading to chaos and unrest among the barons. For these reasons, Pope Leo found the Church at its most powerful, and it's hoped that if others made it great through military strength, he will make it even greater and more respected through his goodness and countless other virtues. Chapter 12. Different types of soldiers and concerning mercenaries. I've talked in detail about the traits of the principalities I initially planned to discuss. I've looked into why some are successful and others aren't, and I've explained the ways people have tried to gain and maintain control over them. Now, it's time for me to talk about the general strategies for offense and defense that each of them uses. We've already seen how important it is for a ruler to have a strong foundation, otherwise they're bound to fail. The main pillars of any state, whether new, old, or a mix, are good laws and a strong military. Since you can't have good laws without a well-equipped military, it stands to reason that if a state is well armed, it will have good laws. I'll skip talking about the laws for now and focus on the military. So, here's the deal. A prince can defend his state with his own forces, or rely on mercenaries, auxiliaries, or a mix of these. Mercenaries and auxiliaries are pretty much useless and dangerous. If a prince depends on them, he won't be stable or secure. They're disorganized, ambitious, lack discipline, untrustworthy, brave in front of friends, but cowardly in front of enemies. They don't fear God or stay loyal to anyone, and disaster is only postponed until an attack happens. In peacetime, they'll rob you, and in war the enemy will. They have no real motivation to fight other than a small paycheck, which isn't enough to make them risk their lives for you. They're happy to be your soldiers when there's no war. But as soon as war breaks out, they either bail or run from the enemy. I could easily prove this, as Italy's downfall was mainly due to relying on mercenaries for years. They used to look brave among themselves, but when foreigners showed up, their true colours came out. That's how Charles, King of France, managed to take over Italy so easily. Someone once said our sins were to blame, and they were right, but not in the way they thought. The real sins were the ones I've mentioned, and since they were the sins of the princes, it's the princes who paid the price. I want to show you just how problematic these mercenaries can be. The captains are either competent or they're not. If they are competent, you can't trust them because they often aim for their own success, either by overpowering you, their employer, or by acting against your wishes. But if the captain isn't skilled, you're doomed in the usual way. If someone argues that anyone with weapons will behave the same way, whether they're a mercenary or not, here's my response. When a prince or a republic needs to use weapons, the prince should personally lead as a captain. A republic should send its own citizens, and if someone sent doesn't perform well, they should be called back. If someone proves capable, they should be kept in command according to the laws. History has shown that princes and republics have made the most progress on their own, while mercenaries have only caused harm. It's harder for a republic with its own weapons to fall under the control of one of its citizens than for one relying on foreign weapons. Rome and Sparta remained armed and free for many years. The Swiss are fully armed and completely free. Take the ancient mercenaries, for instance. The Carthaginians found themselves under the control of their own mercenary soldiers after their first war with the Romans, even though they had their own citizens as captains. Then there's the case of the Thebans, who, after the death of Epaminondas, appointed Philip of Macedon as the captain of their soldiers. After leading them to victory, he ended up taking away their freedom. After Duke Filippo died, the people of Milan hired Francesco Sforza to fight against the Venetians. After defeating the enemy at Caravaggio, Sforza teamed up with the Venetians to turn against the Milanese, who were his employers. His father, Sforza, had been hired by Queen Johanna of Naples but left her without protection, forcing her to seek help from the King of Aragon to save her kingdom. If the Venetians and Florentines expanded their territories using these mercenaries, yet their leaders didn't become rulers themselves but instead defended them, here's my take: the Florentines got lucky. Of the skilled leaders they might have feared, some didn't win, some faced opposition, and others pursued ambitions elsewhere. Giovanni Acuto, for instance, didn't win, so his loyalty was never tested. But everyone agrees that if he had won, the Florentines would have been at his mercy. Sforza always had the Bracceschi as rivals, keeping each other in check. Francesco focused on Lombardy, while Braccio targeted the church and the Kingdom of Naples. Now let's talk about more recent events. The Florentines appointed Pagolo Vitelli as their leader, a very wise man who rose to great fame from humble beginnings. If he had captured Pisa, no one can deny that the Florentines would have had to stay on his good side. If he joined their enemies, they couldn't resist him, and if they stuck with him, they would have to follow his lead. The Venetians, if you look at their history, acted wisely and with honor when they sent their own people to war. Their armed nobles and commoners fought bravely. This was before they started land campaigns, but when they began fighting on land, they abandoned this virtue and followed the Italian way. Early in their land expansion, with little territory and a strong reputation, they didn't have much to fear from their leaders. But when they grew, like under Carmignuola, they realized their mistake. They found him to be a very brave leader. He led them to victory against the Duke of Milan, but they also noticed he was not very enthusiastic about the war. They feared they wouldn't win under him anymore, so they couldn't let him go, nor could they keep him. To protect themselves and not lose what they had gained, they felt forced to kill him. Later, they had leaders like Bartolomeo da Bergamo, Roberto da San Severino, and the Count of Pitigliano, under whom they feared losses rather than gains. This fear came true at Vaila, where in one battle they lost what they had painstakingly built over 800 years. With such mercenaries, victories come slowly, are delayed, and are minor, but losses are sudden and disastrous. Now that I've mentioned these examples, I've arrived at Italy, which has been under the control of mercenaries for many years. I want to talk about this more seriously, so that by understanding how they came to power and developed, we can be better prepared to deal with them. You should know that the empire has recently been rejected in Italy. The Pope has gained more political power, and Italy has been divided into more states. This happened because many major cities took up arms against their nobles, who were previously supported by the emperor and were oppressing them. Meanwhile, the church supported these cities to gain political power. In many cases, the citizens became rulers. As a result, Italy ended up partly in the hands of the church and republics. Since the church was made up of priests and the republics of citizens who weren't used to fighting, both started hiring foreigners. The first person to recognize this type of military force was Alberigo da Conio, the Romagnan. From his teachings came Braccio and Sforza, who were major players in Italy during their time. After them, other leaders emerged who have since led Italy's armies. Unfortunately, their efforts have resulted in Italy being overrun by Charles, plundered by Louis, devastated by Ferdinand, and disrespected by the Swiss. Their main strategy was to downplay the importance of infantry to boost their own status. They did this because, relying solely on their pay and without any land, they couldn't support a large number of soldiers, and a small infantry didn't give them much power. So they focused on using cavalry, which allowed them to maintain their status with a smaller force. This led to situations where, in an army of 20,000 soldiers, there were barely 2,000 foot soldiers. Additionally, they did everything they could to avoid hard work and danger for themselves and their soldiers. Instead of killing in battle, they took prisoners and released them without ransom. They didn't attack towns at night, nor did town garrisons attack camps at night. They didn't fortify their camps with stockades or ditches, and they didn't campaign in the winter. All these practices were allowed by their military rules, and were designed to avoid, as I mentioned, both hard work and danger. As a result, they have brought Italy to a state of weakness and disrespect. Chapter 13, concerning allies, mixed troops, and your own forces. Auxiliaries, which are basically the other useless option, are used when a ruler brings in outside forces to help and defend, like Pope Julius did recently. When he was trying to take Ferrara and found his hired soldiers weren't up to the task, he turned to auxiliaries and made a deal with Ferdinand, the King of Spain, for help with troops and weapons. These forces might be strong and effective on their own, but for the person who calls them in, they're always a bad idea. If you lose, you're finished, and if you win, you're at their mercy. Even though ancient histories are packed with examples, I want to focus on this more recent one about Pope Julius II, whose risky decision is pretty obvious. He wanted to take Ferrara, so he completely relied on foreign help. But he got lucky with a third outcome, so he didn't suffer the consequences of his reckless choice. After his allies were defeated at Ravenna, the Swiss unexpectedly rose up and drove out the conquerors. This surprising turn of events meant he didn't end up as a prisoner to his enemies, who had fled, or to his allies, since he won using different forces than theirs. The Florentines, having no weapons at all, sent 10,000 French soldiers to capture Pisa, which put them in more danger than at any other time during their troubles. The Emperor of Constantinople, to counter his neighbours, sent 10,000 Turks into Greece. Once the war was over, they didn't want to leave, and that's how Greece's servitude to the infidels began. So if someone doesn't want to conquer, they should use these forces, because they're even more dangerous than mercenaries. With these forces, the threat is already there. They're all united and follow someone else's orders. But with mercenaries, even after they've won, it takes more time and better chances for them to harm you. They're not all from the same place. You hire and pay them, and the leader you've appointed can't immediately gain enough power to hurt you. In short, cowardice is the biggest risk with mercenaries, while bravery is the risk with auxiliaries. A wise leader always avoids these forces and relies on their own, preferring to lose with their own troops rather than win with others, because they don't see a victory with someone else's forces as a true victory. I never hesitate to bring up Cesare Borgia and what he did. This duke went into Romagna with backup, only taking French soldiers with him, and with them he captured Imola and Forli. But later on, he didn't think those forces were reliable, so he switched to hiring mercenaries, thinking they were less risky. He brought in the Orsini and Vitelli, but soon realized they were sketchy, untrustworthy, and dangerous, so he got rid of them and relied on his own men. You can easily see the difference between these groups when you look at how the Duke's reputation changed. It was different when he had the French, then the Orsini and Vitelli, and finally when he trusted his own soldiers, who were always loyal and kept getting better. He was never more respected than when everyone saw he was fully in control of his own forces. I wasn't planning to go beyond Italian and recent examples, but I can't leave out Hero, the Syracusan, since I mentioned him earlier. As I said, when he was put in charge of the army by the Syracusans, he quickly realized that a mercenary army, like the ones our Italian leaders use, was useless. Seeing that he couldn't keep them or let them go, he decided to eliminate them all and then fought using his own troops instead of relying on outsiders. I want to bring up a story from the Old Testament that fits this topic. David volunteered to fight Goliath, the Philistine champion, and to boost his confidence, Saul gave him his own armor. But David quickly took it off, saying he couldn't use it and preferred to face the enemy with his sling and knife. In the end, using someone else's weapons either makes them fall off, weigh you down, or hold you back. Charles VII, the father of King Louis XI, managed to free France from the English through a mix of luck and bravery. He realized how important it was to have his own military forces, so he set up rules for soldiers and infantry in his kingdom. Later on, his son, King Louis, got rid of the infantry and started hiring Swiss soldiers. This decision, along with others, has now become a risk for the kingdom. By boosting the reputation of the Swiss, he weakened his own military power, essentially getting rid of the infantry. His soldiers became dependent on others because they were so used to fighting alongside the Swiss that it seems they can't win without them. As a result, the French struggle against the Swiss, and without them, they don't do well against other opponents either. The French armies have become a mix of mercenaries and national troops, which is better than just having mercenaries or auxiliaries, but still not as strong as having their own forces. This situation shows that France would be unbeatable if Charles's military rules had been expanded or kept in place. When people first get involved in something that seems great, they often can't see the hidden problems, like I mentioned before about slow-burning fevers. So, if a leader can't spot issues before they become big problems, they're not really wise, and only a few have this kind of insight. If we look at the first major downfall of the Roman Empire, it started when they began recruiting the Goths. From that point on, the strength of the Roman Empire started to fade, and all the bravery that had built it up shifted to others. So I conclude that no principality is truly secure without its own forces. Otherwise, it's completely reliant on luck, lacking the strength to defend itself in tough times. Wise people have always believed that nothing is as uncertain or unstable as relying on luck or power that isn't based on its own strength. Your own forces should be made up of your subjects, citizens, or dependents. Anyone else is just a mercenary or auxiliary. You'll easily figure out how to prepare your own forces if you think about the guidelines I've suggested, and consider how Philip, Alexander the Great's father, and many republics and princes have armed and organized themselves. I fully stand by these rules. Chapter 14. What a prince needs to know about the art of war. A prince should focus on nothing else but war, its rules and discipline. This is the only skill that truly belongs to a ruler, and it's so powerful that it not only keeps those born as princes in power, but often helps ordinary people rise to that rank. On the flip side, when princes prioritize comfort over military matters, they tend to lose their kingdoms. The main reason for losing power is neglecting this skill, while mastering it is what helps you gain a state. Francesco Sforza became the Duke of Milan because he was skilled in warfare, while his sons, who avoided the challenges of military life, went from being dukes to ordinary citizens. Among the many downsides of being unarmed is that it makes you look weak, and a prince should avoid this kind of disgrace, as we'll discuss later. There's no balance between the armed and the unarmed. It's unreasonable to expect someone with weapons to willingly obey someone without them, or for an unarmed person to feel safe among armed followers. Disdain from one side and suspicion from the other make it impossible for them to work well together. Therefore, a prince who doesn't understand warfare, aside from the other issues mentioned, won't be respected by his soldiers and can't rely on them. He should always keep the topic of war in mind, and during peace he should practice it even more than during war. This can be done in two ways, through action and through study. When it comes to taking action, he should prioritize keeping his men well organized and trained. He should constantly engage in hunting, which helps him toughen up physically and learn about the terrain. This way, he gets familiar with how mountains rise, valleys spread out, plains lie, and understands the nature of rivers and marshes, all while being very careful. This knowledge is useful in two ways. First, he gets to know his own country better and can defend it more effectively. Later, by understanding and observing that area, he can easily grasp any other place he might need to study in the future. The hills, valleys, plains, rivers, and marshes in, say, Tuscany, are somewhat similar to those in other regions, so by knowing one area, he can easily understand others. A prince who lacks this skill misses out on a crucial ability that a leader should have, as it helps him surprise his enemies, choose camps, lead armies, plan battles, and effectively besiege towns. Philopoemen, the leader of the Achaeans, is praised by writers for many things, including his habit of thinking about war strategies even during times of peace. When he was out in the countryside with friends, he would often pause and discuss scenarios with them. If the enemy were on that hill and we were here with our army, who would have the advantage? How should we best move forward to confront them while keeping our formation? If we needed to retreat, how should we go about it? He would explain all the possible situations an army might face, listen to their opinions, and share his own thoughts, backing them up with reasons. Through these ongoing discussions, he ensured that no unexpected situation would catch him off guard during wartime. To sharpen his mind, a prince should read history and study the actions of great leaders. He should look at how they handled themselves in war, understand why they won or lost, and learn to avoid their mistakes while copying their successes. It's especially useful to follow the example of a renowned figure from the past. Just like Alexander the Great looked up to Achilles, Caesar admired Alexander, and Scipio was inspired by Cyrus. If you read Xenophon's account of Cyrus's life, you'll see how Scipio mirrored him, gaining fame for his virtues like chastity, kindness, humanity, and generosity. A smart prince should follow similar guidelines and never be idle during peaceful times. Instead, he should work hard to build his resources so they're ready to use in tough times, ensuring that if luck turns against him, he's prepared to handle it. Chapter 15. Concerning things. People, especially leaders, get praised or criticized for. Now let's talk about how a prince should behave towards his subjects and friends. I know a lot of people have already written about this, and I might seem bold for bringing it up again, especially since I'm going to approach it differently. But since I want to write something useful for those who appreciate it, I think it's better to focus on the reality of the situation rather than some idealized version of it. Many have imagined republics and principalities that have never actually existed because the way people live is often very different from how they should live. If someone ignores reality in favor of ideals, they're more likely to bring about their own downfall than their success. A person who tries to act completely according to their virtuous ideals will quickly find themselves overwhelmed by the harsh realities of the world. So, if a prince wants to maintain his power, he needs to know how to do wrong and use it when necessary. Let's set aside the idealized notions of a prince and focus on reality. People, especially those in power, are often known for traits that either earn them praise or criticism. For instance, one might be seen as generous, another as stingy. In Tuscan terms, stingy means someone who doesn't use their own resources enough, while avaricious refers to someone who wants to gain through theft. Some are viewed as kind, others as greedy, some as cruel, others as compassionate, some as faithful, others as unfaithful, some as cowardly, others as brave, some as friendly, others as arrogant, some as lustful, others as chaste, some as sincere, others as cunning, some as harsh, others as easygoing, some as serious, others as frivolous, some as religious, others as unbelieving, and so on. Everyone would agree that it would be great for a prince to have all the good qualities, but since it's impossible to have or show them all, because human nature doesn't allow it, a prince must be wise enough to avoid the traits that could lead to losing his power. He should try to stay away from those traits that won't cost him his state, but if that's not possible, he should be less worried about embracing them. He shouldn't stress about being criticized for vices that are necessary to save his state. When you look at it closely, you'll find that some things that seem virtuous could lead to his downfall, while others that seem like vices might actually bring him security and success. Chapter 16, concerning generosity and stinginess. Starting with the first characteristic mentioned, I'd say it's great to be known as generous. However, if you're generous in a way that doesn't earn you that reputation, it can actually hurt you. If you're genuinely generous and do it the right way, people might not notice, and you could end up being criticized for being the opposite. So if someone wants to be known as generous, they have to go all out with grand gestures. A prince who wants this reputation might end up spending all his money on such acts, and, to keep up the image of being generous, he might have to burden his people with taxes and do whatever he can to get more money. This will quickly make him unpopular with his subjects, and as he becomes poorer, people will respect him less. So by trying to be generous, he ends up upsetting many and pleasing only a few. When trouble arises, he's in a tough spot and vulnerable to any danger. Realizing this, if he tries to pull back, he immediately gets labeled as stingy. So if a prince can't show generosity without it costing him too much, he shouldn't worry about being seen as stingy. If he's smart, he'll realize that being careful with money will eventually earn him more respect than being overly generous. By managing his finances well, he'll have enough resources to defend himself from attacks and take on new projects without overburdening his people. This way, he ends up being generous to the countless people he doesn't take from, and only seems stingy to the few he doesn't give to. We haven't seen great things accomplished in our time except by those who were considered stingy. Everyone else has failed. Pope Julius II got help reaching the papacy because he was known for being generous, but he didn't try to maintain that reputation when he went to war with the King of France. He fought many wars without putting any extra taxes on his people because he covered the extra costs with his long-term savings. The current King of Spain wouldn't have taken on or succeeded in so many ventures if he was known for being generous. So, a prince, as long as he doesn't have to rob his people, can defend himself, doesn't become poor and desperate, and isn't forced to be greedy, shouldn't worry too much about being seen as stingy, because it's one of those flaws that can actually help him govern. If someone says Caesar gained power by being generous, and many others have reached the top by being generous and being seen that way, here's my response. You're either already a ruler or on your way to becoming one. If you're already in charge, being too generous can be risky. But if you're trying to get there, it's really important to be seen as generous. Caesar wanted to stand out in Rome, but if he had lived longer after achieving that and hadn't cut back on his spending, he would have ruined his rule. If someone argues that many rulers have done great things with their armies while being seen as very generous, I'd say a ruler either spends their own money, their people's money, or someone else's. If it's their own, they should be careful. If it's their people's, they shouldn't miss any chance to be generous. For a ruler leading an army and supporting it through looting and taking from others, this kind of generosity is necessary. Otherwise, soldiers wouldn't follow them. When it comes to spending what's neither yours nor your people's, you can be generous like Cyrus, Caesar, and Alexander were. It doesn't hurt your reputation to waste others' resources, it actually boosts it. It's only when you waste your own that it harms you. Nothing drains your resources faster than generosity. While you're being generous, you lose the ability to keep it up, and you might end up poor or looked down upon. Or, if you try to avoid becoming poor, you might become greedy and hated. A leader should be careful not to be despised or hated, and generosity can lead to both. It's smarter to be known as a bit stingy, which might get you some criticism but not hatred, rather than trying to be seen as generous and ending up being called greedy, which brings both criticism and hatred. Chapter 17, concerning cruelty and kindness, and whether it's better to be loved or feared. Now, let's talk about the other qualities I mentioned earlier. Every leader should want to be seen as compassionate, not cruel. However, it's important not to abuse this compassion. Cesare Borgia was thought to be cruel, but his harshness brought order to the Romagna, unified it and restored peace and loyalty. If you really think about it, he was actually more merciful than the people of Florence, who, in trying to avoid being seen as cruel, allowed Pistoia to be destroyed. So as long as a leader keeps their people united and loyal, they shouldn't worry too much about being called cruel. With just a few examples, they can be more merciful than those who, by being too lenient, let chaos happen, leading to murders or robberies that harm everyone. In contrast, when a leader takes decisive action, it usually only affects a few individuals. For any new ruler, it's impossible to avoid being called cruel, because new territories are full of challenges. That's why Virgil, speaking through Dido, justifies the harshness of her rule by saying it's because her reign is new. The tough situation and the newness of my reign force me to do these things. Protect and watch over the borders far and wide. However, he should take his time before believing or acting, and he shouldn't show fear. Instead, he should move forward calmly, with wisdom and kindness, so that being overly confident doesn't make him careless and being too distrustful doesn't make him unbearable. A shaky throne and a young nation. Tell me to defend my lands with all my strength and protect my shores with these strict measures. Christopher Pitt. This brings up a question. Is it better to be loved or feared? Ideally, you'd want to be both, but since it's tough to combine them in one person, it's safer to be feared than loved if you have to choose. Generally speaking, people can be ungrateful, unpredictable, deceitful, cowardly, and greedy. As long as you're successful, they're completely on your side. They'll offer you their blood, property, life, and children, as mentioned earlier, when the danger is far off. But when it gets close, they turn against you. A leader who relies solely on their promises and ignores other precautions is doomed. Friendships bought with money, rather than earned through greatness or nobility, might be acquired but aren't secure and can't be counted on in tough times. People are less hesitant to wrong someone they love than someone they fear because love is maintained by a sense of obligation which people easily break for their own benefit. Fear, on the other hand, keeps you safe through the threat of punishment, which is a much more reliable deterrent. Still, a leader should make people afraid in a way that, if he doesn't earn their love, he avoids their hatred. He can handle being feared as long as he's not hated, which will be the case as long as he stays away from taking his citizens' and subjects' property and doesn't mess with their women. But if he has to take someone's life, he should have a good reason and a clear cause. Above all, he should keep his hands off other people's property, because people forget the death of a father faster than the loss of their inheritance. Plus, there are always excuses for taking property. Once someone starts living by stealing, they'll always find reasons to take what's not theirs. However, finding reasons to take a life is harder, and they don't last as long. But when a leader is with his army and has a bunch of soldiers to manage, it's necessary for him to not worry about being seen as cruel. Without that, he'd never keep his army together or focused on their duties. Among the amazing feats of Hannibal, one stands out. He led a massive army made up of many different races to fight in foreign lands, and there were no conflicts among them or against him, whether things were going well or badly. This was due to his extreme cruelty, which, combined with his incredible bravery, made him both respected and feared by his soldiers. Without that cruelty, his other qualities wouldn't have been enough to achieve this. Some writers admire his actions from one angle, but criticize the main reason behind them. It's true that his other virtues alone wouldn't have been enough, as shown by the example of Scipio, an outstanding man, not just of his time, but in living memory. Despite this, his army rebelled against him in Spain, and this was solely because he was too lenient, giving his soldiers more freedom than was good for military discipline. Fabius Maximus criticized him in the Senate, calling him the corrupter of the Roman soldiers. The Locrians were devastated by one of Scipio's officers, yet Scipio didn't avenge them or punish the officer's arrogance, all because of his easy-going nature. Someone in the Senate, trying to defend him, said there were many people who were better at not making mistakes than at fixing others' mistakes. If Scipio had stayed in command, this trait would have eventually ruined his reputation and glory. However, since he was under the Senate's control, this harmful trait was not only hidden, but also added to his glory. When it comes to whether it's better to be feared or loved, I've concluded that since people love at their own discretion, but fear based on the ruler's influence, a smart ruler should focus on what they can control, not what others can. They should just make sure to avoid being hated, as mentioned. Chapter 18. Concerning the way princes should keep their promises. Everyone agrees that it's admirable for a leader to be trustworthy and live with honesty rather than deceit. However, history shows us that those leaders who achieved great things often didn't put much stock in keeping their word. Instead, they knew how to outsmart people with cunning and ultimately defeated those who relied on promises. You should know there are two ways to handle conflicts. One is through law, and the other is through force. The first method is suitable for humans, and the second for animals. But since the first isn't always enough, sometimes you need to resort to the second. So a leader needs to know how to use both the human and the beastly approaches. Ancient writers have taught this through stories of how Achilles and other old-time leaders were raised by the centaur Chiron, who was half beast and half human. This means that leaders need to know how to use both sides of their nature, and one without the other isn't sustainable. A leader, when forced to act like a beast, should choose to be both a fox and a lion. The lion can't defend against traps, and the fox can't defend against wolves. So, you need to be a fox to spot traps, and a lion to scare off wolves. Those who rely only on being a lion don't really know what they're doing. Therefore, a smart leader shouldn't feel obliged to keep promises when it could be harmful, and when the reasons for making those promises no longer exist. If people were completely good, this advice wouldn't apply, but since they're not, and they won't keep their promises to you, you don't have to keep yours to them. A leader will always find valid reasons to justify breaking promises. There are countless modern examples of treaties and agreements being broken because of untrustworthy leaders, and those who have mastered the art of being a fox have been the most successful. But it's important to know how to hide this trait well and be a great pretender and deceiver. People are so straightforward and focused on their immediate needs that anyone looking to deceive will always find someone willing to be deceived. I can't help but mention a recent example. Alexander VI did nothing but deceive people and never thought of doing anything else, and he always found victims. There was never a man more convincing, or who would swear to something with greater conviction, yet he would follow through the least. Still, his deceptions always worked out just as he wanted, because he understood this aspect of human nature very well. Alexander never followed through on what he said he would do. Cesare never talked about what he did. Italian proverb. So a prince doesn't actually need to have all the good qualities I've mentioned, but it's really important to look like he does. I'll even go as far as to say that having these qualities and always sticking to them can be harmful, while just appearing to have them is beneficial. It's useful to seem merciful, faithful, humane, religious, and honest, and to actually be those things, but with the mindset that if you need to be the opposite, you can switch it up and know how to do it. You need to understand that a prince, especially a new one, can't always do all the things people admire. Sometimes, to keep his position, he has to act against loyalty, friendship, kindness, and religion. So he needs to be flexible and adapt to changing circumstances, but as I mentioned before, he should stick to doing good if he can. However, if he has no choice, he should know how to handle it. That's why a prince should make sure that everything he says reflects those 5 qualities: merciful, faithful, humane, upright, and religious. It's especially important to seem religious because people usually judge more by what they see than by what they actually experience. Everyone can see how you present yourself, but only a few really know who you are. And those few usually won't go against the opinion of the majority, who have the power of the state on their side. When it comes to the actions of all people, especially princes, which aren't wise to question, people judge based on the outcome. Because of this, if a prince manages to conquer and maintain his state, people will always see his methods as legitimate, and he'll be praised by everyone. This is because most people are easily swayed by appearances and outcomes. In the world, it's mostly these ordinary folks who matter, as the few only have influence when the majority have nothing to stand on. There's a current prince, who I won't name, who always talks about peace and honesty, but he's actually against both. If he had stuck to them, he would have lost his reputation and kingdom many times over. Chapter 19. How to avoid being disliked and hated. Now, about the traits I mentioned earlier, I've already talked about the most important ones. For the rest, I'll just say this. A prince should focus on avoiding anything that might make him hated or looked down upon. As long as he manages to do that, he's done his job and he doesn't need to worry about other criticisms. As I've mentioned, nothing makes someone more hated than being greedy and violating the property and women of their subjects. It's crucial to avoid both. When people's property and honor are left alone, most are content, and the leader only has to deal with the ambitions of a few, which can be easily managed in various ways. Being seen as fickle, frivolous, weak, mean-spirited, or indecisive makes him look contemptible, and a prince should avoid these traits like the plague. Instead, he should strive to display greatness, courage, seriousness, and strength in his actions. In his private interactions with his subjects, he should make it clear that his decisions are final, and maintain a reputation that makes it impossible for anyone to think they can deceive or manipulate him. A prince is really admired when he gives off a strong impression of himself, and someone who is admired isn't easily targeted for conspiracies. If people know he's a great leader and respected by his people, it's tough to attack him. Because of this, a prince should be aware of 2 main concerns, one from his own people and the other from outside forces. He can protect himself from external threats by being well armed and having strong allies. If he's well prepared, he'll have good friends, and things will stay calm at home as long as they are calm outside, unless there's already been some conspiracy. Even if there are issues outside, if he's prepared and lives as I've suggested, he can handle any attack without losing hope, just like Nabis the Spartan did. When it comes to his subjects, if things are chaotic outside, a prince only needs to worry about them secretly plotting against him. He can easily protect himself from this by making sure he's not hated or looked down upon, and by keeping the people happy with him, which is super important, as I mentioned earlier. One of the best ways a prince can guard against plots is by not being hated or despised by the people. Anyone plotting against a prince usually thinks they'll make the people happy by getting rid of him. But if the plotter knows that the people will be upset, they won't have the guts to go through with it, because plotting is full of challenges. History shows that there have been many plots, but only a few have succeeded. This is because a plotter can't work alone and has to find a partner among those who are unhappy. Once you share your plan with someone unhappy, you've given them a chance to benefit by betraying you. By turning you in, they can gain a lot. So seeing that this path is safe and the other is risky and dangerous, only a truly loyal friend or a determined enemy of the prince would stick with you. To put it simply, for the conspirator there's nothing but fear, jealousy, and the threat of punishment to scare him. On the other hand, the prince has the authority of his position, the law, the support of friends, and the state to protect him. Plus, when you add the goodwill of the people, it's almost impossible for anyone to be reckless enough to plot against him. Generally, a conspirator is worried about getting caught before carrying out their plan, but in this situation, they also have to worry about what happens afterward. Because of their actions, they end up with the people as their enemies, leaving them with no hope of escape. There are countless examples I could give on this topic, but I'll stick with one that happened within our grandparents' lifetime. Messer Annibale Bentivogli, who was the ruler in Bologna, grandfather of the current Annibale, was killed by the Caneschi, who had plotted against him. After his assassination, only Messer Giovanni, who was just a child, survived from his family. Right after Annibale was killed, the people rose up and killed all the Caneschi. This happened because the Bentivogli family was so well liked in Bologna at the time. Their popularity was so strong that even though no one from the family was left to lead after Annibale's death, the people of Bologna found out there was a Bentivogli family member in Florence. Up until then, he was thought to be the son of a blacksmith. They sent for him and put him in charge of their city, and he ruled until Messer Giovanni eventually took over. That's why I think a prince shouldn't worry too much about conspiracies if the people respect him. But if they're against him and hate him, he should be wary of everything and everyone. Smart leaders and well-run states make sure not to push the nobles to the brink and keep the people happy and content, because that's one of the most important goals a prince can have. France is one of the best organized and well-governed countries today, with many great systems that ensure the king's freedom and safety. The most important of these is the parliament and its authority. The kingdom's founder understood the ambition and boldness of the nobility and knew they needed to be kept in check. At the same time, he recognized the people's fear-based dislike of the nobles and wanted to protect them without making it the king's personal responsibility. To avoid criticism from the nobles for siding with the people, or from the people for siding with the nobles, he established an impartial judge. This judge could keep the powerful in line and support the less powerful without the king being blamed. This setup is both wise and provides great security for the king and the kingdom. From this, we can learn that rulers should delegate tasks that might bring criticism and keep the more favorable tasks for themselves. Additionally, I believe a ruler should support the nobles, but not to the extent that it causes the people to dislike him. Some people might think that the lives and deaths of Roman emperors contradict my opinion. After all, many of them lived nobly and had great qualities, yet they lost their empires or were killed by conspiracies. To address these objections, I'll go over the characters of some emperors and show that the reasons for their downfall align with what I've said. I'll focus on the important points for anyone studying those times. I think it's enough to look at all the emperors who took over the empire from Marcus the philosopher up to Maximinus. They were Marcus and his son Commodus, Pertinax, Julian, Severus, and his son Antoninus Caracalla, Macrinus, Heliogabalus, Alexander, and Maximinus. First off, it's important to point out that Unlike in other principalities where you only had to deal with the ambitions of the nobles and the unruliness of the people, the Roman emperors faced an extra challenge, the cruelty and greed of their soldiers. This issue was so tricky that it led to the downfall of many emperors. It was tough to keep both the soldiers and the people happy because the people wanted peace and preferred a calm, unambitious ruler. Meanwhile, the soldiers favored a leader who was bold, cruel, and greedy, traits they were fine with him using against the people so they could get extra pay and indulge their own greed and cruelty. As a result, emperors who didn't have strong authority, either by birth or training, often got overthrown. Most of them, especially those new to power, realized how hard it was to balance these conflicting interests and tended to side with the soldiers, even if it meant harming the people. This was necessary because since princes can't avoid being hated by someone, they should first try to avoid being hated by everyone. When that's not possible, they should work really hard to avoid the hatred of the most powerful group. So, inexperienced emperors who needed extra support often stuck with the soldiers over the people, and whether this worked out for them depended on how well they could maintain control over the soldiers. Because of these reasons, Marcus, Pertinax, and Alexander, who were all modest, loved justice, opposed cruelty, and were kind and humane, met unfortunate ends except for Marcus. He was the only one who lived a long and honored life because he inherited the throne and didn't owe his position to either the soldiers or the people. Additionally, he had many virtues that earned him respect, and he maintained order among both groups during his reign, so he was neither hated nor despised. Pertinax was made emperor even though the soldiers didn't want him. They were used to living wildly under Commodus and couldn't handle the honest lifestyle Pertinax wanted to enforce. This led to them hating him, and combined with their lack of respect for his old age, he was overthrown right at the start of his rule. It's important to note that you can be hated for doing good things just as much as for doing bad things. So, as I mentioned earlier, a prince who wants to keep his power often has to do some bad things. If the group you rely on, whether it's the people, the soldiers, or the nobles, is corrupt, you have to go along with their whims and keep them happy, because doing good things might actually harm you. Now let's talk about Alexander, who was such a good guy that one of the many compliments he received was that during the 14 years he ruled the empire, he never had anyone executed without a fair trial. However, people thought he was weak and let his mum control him, so he lost respect. The army turned against him and ended up killing him. Now let's talk about the very different personalities of Commodus, Severus, Antoninus Caracalla, and Maximinus. You'll see that they were all cruel and greedy men who didn't think twice about doing terrible things to the people just to keep their soldiers happy. All of them, except Severus, met a bad end. But Severus had so much strength and bravery that even though he oppressed the people, he kept the soldiers on his side and ruled successfully. His bravery earned him so much admiration from both the soldiers and the people that the people were left in awe and fear, while the soldiers remained respectful and content. Since Severus, as a new ruler, achieved great things, I want to briefly show how he was skilled at being both cunning like a fox and strong like a lion, qualities that, as I mentioned earlier, are essential for a ruler to imitate. Knowing how lazy Emperor Julian was, he convinced the army in Sclavonia, where he was the captain, that it was right to go to Rome and avenge the death of Pertinax, who had been killed by the Praetorian soldiers. Using this as an excuse, and without making it obvious that he wanted the throne, he moved the army to Rome and reached Italy before anyone even knew he had left. When he got to Rome, the Senate, out of fear, made him emperor and killed Julian. After that, Severus, who wanted to take control of the whole empire, faced two challenges. One in Asia, where Niger, the head of the Asiatic army, had declared himself emperor, and the other in the west with Albinus, who also wanted the throne. Since it was risky to fight both at once, he decided to attack Niger and trick Albinus. He wrote to Albinus, saying that since the Senate had elected him emperor, he was willing to share that honor with him, and even sent him the title of Caesar. He also told him that the Senate had made Albinus his colleague, which Albinus believed. But after Severus defeated and killed Niger and sorted out things in the east, he went back to Rome and told the Senate that Albinus, not appreciating the favors he had received, had tried to betray and kill him. Because of this betrayal, Severus said he had no choice but to punish him. He then went after Albinus in France, taking away his power and his life. If you look closely at what this man did, you'll see he was both a brave lion and a clever fox. He was feared and respected by everyone, and not hated by the army. It's no surprise that he, a newcomer, managed to hold on to the empire so well, because his great reputation always shielded him from any hatred the people might have had for his harshness. But his son Antoninus was an outstanding man with amazing qualities that made him admired by the people and liked by the soldiers. He was a tough guy, really good at handling fatigue, and didn't care for fancy food or other luxuries, which made the armies love him. However, his brutality and cruelty was so extreme and unheard of that after countless individual murders, he ended up killing a large number of people in Rome and everyone in Alexandria. He became hated worldwide and even feared by those around him, to the point where he was killed in the middle of his army by a centurion. It's important to note that such deaths, carried out with determined and desperate courage, can't really be avoided by rulers, because anyone who isn't afraid to die can make them happen. But a ruler doesn't need to worry too much because these incidents are very rare. They just need to be careful not to seriously harm those they employ or have around them in service to the state. Antoninus didn't take this precaution and had insultingly killed the brother of that centurion, whom he also threatened daily, yet kept in his bodyguard. This turned out to be a reckless move and led to the emperor's downfall. Let's talk about Commodus. He should have had an easy time ruling the empire since he inherited it from his father, Marcus. All he needed to do was follow in his father's footsteps to keep both the people and the soldiers happy. But Commodus was naturally cruel and brutal. He focused on entertaining and corrupting the soldiers so he could exploit the people. He didn't maintain his dignity and often lowered himself by competing in the theatre with gladiators and doing other disgraceful things that were unworthy of an emperor. This led to the soldiers losing respect for him. Hated by some and despised by others, he eventually faced a conspiracy against him and was killed. Let's talk about Maximinus's character. He was a very warlike guy, and the armies, fed up with Alexander's softness, who I've mentioned before, killed Alexander and made Maximinus the emperor. But he didn't hold on to the throne for long, because two things made people hate and look down on him. First, he used to be a shepherd in Thrace, which everyone knew and thought was a huge embarrassment. Second, when he became emperor, he delayed going to Rome to take his seat of power. He also got a reputation for being extremely brutal because his officials in Rome and other parts of the empire committed many cruel acts. This made everyone angry about his humble beginnings and scared of his cruelty. First, Africa rebelled. Then the Senate, along with all the people of Rome and all of Italy, plotted against him. Even his own army turned on him. While they were besieging Aquileia and having a hard time capturing it, they got fed up with his cruelty. Realizing how many people were against him, they feared him less and ended up killing him. I don't want to talk about Heliogabalus, Macrinus, or Julian, who were so unremarkable that they were quickly forgotten. Instead, I'll wrap up by saying that modern-day rulers have an easier time dealing with the challenge of keeping their soldiers excessively satisfied. While they still need to give them some perks, it's not as big of a deal. Unlike the Roman Empire, Today's rulers don't have armies that are experienced in running and managing provinces. Back then, it was more important to keep the soldiers happy than the general public. But now, except for the Turk and the Soldan, it's more crucial for rulers to please the people rather than the soldiers, because the people hold more power. I've left out the Turk from the above, who always has around 12,000 infantry and 15,000 cavalry with him. The security and strength of the kingdom rely on them, so he needs to keep them as his allies, putting aside any concerns for the people. The kingdom of the Sultan is similar. It's entirely controlled by soldiers, so he also needs to keep them as his allies, regardless of the people. But note that the Sultan state is different from other principalities because it's like the Christian papacy. It can't be called either a hereditary or a newly formed principality, because the sons of the old ruler aren't the heirs. Instead, the person elected by those in power takes that position, and the sons just remain noblemen. Since this is an old tradition, it can't be called a new principality because it doesn't face the challenges new ones do. Even though the ruler is new, the state structure is old and designed to accept him as if he were its hereditary lord. Getting back to what we're talking about, I want to point out that if you think about it, you'll see that either hatred or contempt led to the downfall of the emperors I mentioned earlier. You'll also notice that while some of them acted one way and others acted differently, only one from each group ended up happy, while the rest didn't. For example, it wouldn't have made sense for Pertinax and Alexander, who were new rulers, to try to be like Marcus, who inherited his position. Similarly, it would have been a disaster for Caracalla, Commodus, and Maximinus to try to be like Severus, because they didn't have the strength to follow in his footsteps. So a new ruler can't just copy Marcus's actions, and they don't need to follow Severus's path exactly either. Instead, they should take the necessary strategies from Severus to establish their rule and adopt the honourable qualities of Marcus to maintain a stable and strong state. Chapter 20. Are fortresses and many other things princes often turn to helpful or harmful? 1. Some rulers, to keep their power secure, have disarmed their people. Others have kept their towns divided by encouraging factions. Some have even encouraged enemies against themselves. Others have worked to win over those they didn't trust at the start of their rule. Some have built fortresses, while others have torn them down. While you can't make a final judgment on all these actions without knowing the specifics of each situation, I'll try to cover the topic as thoroughly as possible. 2. No new ruler has ever taken away weapons from their people. In fact, when they find their people unarmed, they always arm them. By doing this, those weapons become yours. The people you didn't trust become loyal, and those who were already loyal stay that way, turning your subjects into your supporters. While not everyone can be armed, those who do receive weapons feel valued, and you can manage the others more easily. This difference in treatment, which they clearly understand, makes the armed ones your dependents, and the others, seeing that those who face the most danger and do the most work get the most rewards, understand your reasoning. But if you disarm them, you immediately upset them by showing you don't trust them, either because you think they're cowardly or disloyal, and either belief leads to them hating you. Since you can't stay unarmed, you end up relying on mercenaries who are unreliable, as previously mentioned. Even if they're good, they won't be enough to protect you against strong enemies and untrustworthy subjects. So, as I've said, a new ruler in a new territory has always handed out weapons. History is full of examples. However, when a ruler takes over a new area and adds it to their existing territory, it's necessary to disarm the people of that new area, except for those who helped you take it over. Over time, these allies should be made less threatening, and you should arrange things so that all the armed people in the area are your own soldiers who were already living near you in your original territory. 3. Our ancestors, and those considered wise back then, used to say that it was necessary to control Pistoia through factions and Pisa with fortresses. With this in mind, they encouraged conflicts in some of their subordinate towns to make it easier to maintain control. This might have worked in those days when Italy was more balanced, but I don't think it's a good strategy for today. I don't believe factions are ever helpful. In fact, when an enemy attacks a divided city, you're quickly defeated because the weaker side will always support the outsiders, and the other side won't be able to hold out. The Venetians, probably influenced by these reasons, encouraged the Guelph and Ghibelline factions in their subject cities. Although they never let these disputes turn violent, they kept the arguments alive so the citizens, distracted by their disagreements, wouldn't unite against them. However, as we saw, this didn't work out as planned because after the defeat at Vaila, one faction quickly gained confidence and took over the state. Such tactics show weakness in the ruler because strong principalities would never allow factions. These methods might help manage subjects more easily during peaceful times, but if war breaks out, this approach fails. 4. There's no doubt that princes become great when they tackle the challenges and obstacles they face more easily during peaceful times, but if war breaks out, this approach fails. 4. There's no doubt that princes become great when they tackle the challenges and obstacles they face. That's why Fortune, especially when she wants to elevate a new prince who needs to earn a reputation more than an heir does, creates enemies and plots against him. This gives him the chance to overcome them and rise higher, like climbing a ladder built by his enemies. Because of this, many believe that a wise prince, when he gets the chance, should cleverly stir up some opposition against himself. By defeating it, his reputation can soar even higher. 5. New rulers often find more loyalty and help from people they initially distrusted than from those they trusted right away. Pandolfo Petrucci, the Prince of Siena, managed his state more effectively with those he initially distrusted. However, this isn't a one-size-fits-all situation, because it really depends on the individual. What I can say is that those who were against a new ruler at first, if they need support to maintain their position, can be won over pretty easily. They'll likely serve the ruler faithfully because they need to prove themselves and erase the bad impression they initially gave. As a result, the ruler often benefits more from them than from those who feel too secure and might slack off on their duties. Since this is important, I must also advise a ruler who has gained power through secret favors to carefully consider why those people supported him. If their support wasn't out of genuine affection, but rather dissatisfaction with the previous government, keeping them happy will be tough and challenging, as it'll be impossible to meet their expectations. Looking at examples from both the past and present, it's often easier for a ruler to win over those who were content with the previous government and are now his enemies, rather than those who were unhappy with it and supported his rise to power. 6. It's been a tradition for rulers to build fortresses to keep their lands secure. These fortresses act like a control mechanism against those who might plot against them and serve as a safe haven during an initial attack. I think this approach is commendable because it's been used in the past. However, in our times, we've seen people like Niccolò Vitelli tear down 2 fortresses in Città di Castello to maintain control over that area. Guido Ubaldo, Duke of Urbino, after being ousted by Cesare Borgia, demolished all the fortresses in his province, believing it would be harder to lose without them. The Bentivogli family made a similar choice when they returned to Bologna. So, whether fortresses are useful depends on the situation. They can help in one way, but hurt in another. Here's how you can think about it. If a ruler is more worried about their own people than foreign threats, they should build fortresses. But if they're more concerned about foreign threats, they should skip them. The castle in Milan, built by Francesco Sforza, has caused and will continue to cause more trouble for the Sforza family than any other issue in the state. That's why the best fortress is not being hated by the people. Even if you have fortresses, they won't save you if the people despise you, because there will always be foreigners ready to help a people who rise against you. In our times, fortresses haven't really helped any ruler, except for the Countess of Forli. When her husband, Count Girolamo, was killed, the fortress allowed her to withstand a popular attack and wait for help from Milan, eventually regaining her state. At that time, foreigners couldn't help the people. But later, when Cesare Borgia attacked her and the people allied with foreigners, the fortresses were of little use. So it would have been safer for her, both then and before, not to be hated by the people, rather than relying on fortresses. Considering all this, I'll commend those who build fortresses and those who don't, but I'll criticize anyone who relies on them and doesn't care about being disliked by the people. Chapter 21. How a Prince Should Behave to Become Famous. Nothing earns a prince more respect than taking on big projects and setting a great example. Take Ferdinand of Aragon, the current King of Spain, for instance. He's almost like a new prince because he's gone from being a pretty minor king to one of the top rulers in Europe, all thanks to his fame and achievements. If you look at what he's done, you'll see that his actions are impressive and sometimes even extraordinary. At the start of his reign, he went after Granada, and this move laid the groundwork for his kingdom. He started off quietly, without worrying about any obstacles, because he kept the barons of Castile focused on the war, so they didn't see that he was gaining power over them. He managed to fund his armies with money from the church and the people, and through that long war, he built up the military skills that have made him stand out. Plus, he always used religion as an excuse to take on bigger plans, like when he ruthlessly drove the Moors out of his kingdom in the name of piety. You won't find a more admirable or rare example than that. Using the same strategy, he went after Africa, moved into Italy, and eventually attacked France. His achievements and plans have always been grand, keeping his people in suspense, admiration, and focused on the outcomes. His actions have been so interconnected that no one has had the chance to consistently oppose him. It's really helpful for a prince to set unique examples in internal affairs, like the stories about Messer Bernabo da Milano. Whenever someone in civilian life did something extraordinary, whether good or bad, he would find a way to reward or punish them in a way that got people talking. Above all, a prince should always strive to build a reputation as a great and remarkable person through his actions. A prince earns respect when he's either a true friend or a clear enemy. In other words, when he openly supports one side over the other without hesitation. This approach is always better than staying neutral. If two powerful neighbors start fighting, you have to consider whether you'll need to fear the winner or not. Either way, it's always better to pick a side and fight hard. If you don't choose a side, you'll end up at the mercy of the winner, pleasing the loser, and you'll have no excuses or protection. The winner won't want unreliable friends who didn't help when it mattered, and the loser won't welcome you because you didn't stand by him when things got tough. Antiochus went to Greece because the Aetolians invited him to help kick out the Romans. He sent messengers to the Achaeans, who were friends with the Romans, asking them to stay neutral. Meanwhile, the Romans were pushing the Achaeans to join the fight. This issue was debated in the Achaean Council, where Antiochus's representative encouraged them to stay out of it. The Roman representative responded, "The idea that it's better for your state to stay out of our conflict is completely wrong. If you don't get involved, you'll end up being at the mercy of whoever wins, without any favor or consideration. It's always the case that those who aren't your friends will ask you to stay neutral, while your friends will urge you to take a stand. Indecisive leaders often choose neutrality to avoid immediate risks, but this usually leads to their downfall. However, If a leader boldly supports one side, and that side wins even if the victor is powerful and could easily dominate, they owe you a debt of gratitude, creating a bond of friendship. People aren't usually so shameless as to repay your support with oppression. Victories are rarely so absolute that the winner doesn't need to show some respect, especially towards justice. But if the side you support loses, you might find refuge with them, and as long as they can, they may help you, making you partners in a future comeback. In the second scenario, when the people fighting are such that you don't really care who wins, it's even smarter to form an alliance. This way you help one side destroy the other, and if the one you're helping was smart, they would have saved themselves. With your help, they're bound to win, and then they're under your control. It's important for a prince to remember not to team up with someone more powerful than themselves to attack others, unless they absolutely have to, as mentioned earlier. If the stronger ally wins, you're at their mercy, and princes should try to avoid being at anyone's mercy whenever possible. The Venetians teamed up with France against the Duke of Milan, and this alliance led to their downfall, which could have been avoided. But when there's no way around it, like when the Florentines had to deal with the Pope and Spain sending armies to attack Lombardy, then in such situations, for the reasons mentioned, the prince should support one of the sides. No government should ever think it can choose completely safe options. Instead, it should be prepared to make some pretty uncertain decisions. In everyday situations, you often can't avoid one problem without running into another. Being wise means knowing how to tell the difference between problems and choosing the lesser of two evils. A prince should also present himself as a supporter of talent and honor, those who excel in any art. At the same time, he should encourage his citizens to pursue their professions peacefully, whether in business, farming, or any other field. People shouldn't be afraid to improve their properties because they fear they'll be taken away, nor should they hesitate to start trading because of taxes. Instead, the prince should offer rewards to anyone who wants to do these things and aims to bring honor to their city or state. Additionally, he should host festivals and events for the people at appropriate times throughout the year. Since every city is organized into guilds or societies, he should respect these groups, occasionally spend time with them, and demonstrate courtesy and generosity. However, he must always uphold the dignity of his position and never compromise on that. Chapter 22, concerning the prince's secretaries. Choosing the right staff is really important for a leader, and their quality reflects the leader's judgment. The first impression people get of a leader and their intelligence often comes from looking at the people they surround themselves with. If the staff is capable and loyal, the leader is usually seen as wise because they knew how to pick the right people and keep them loyal. But if the staff isn't up to par, it's hard to have a good opinion of the leader, since their first mistake was in choosing them. Everyone who knew Antonio da Venafro as the assistant to Pandolfo Petrucci, the Prince of Siena, thought Pandolfo was really smart for having Venafro work for him. You see, there are 3 types of intelligence. One that understands things on its own, another that can appreciate what others have figured out, and a third that doesn't understand anything on its own or from others. The first type is the best, the second is good, and the third is pretty much useless. So, if Pandolfo wasn't in the first category, he was definitely in the second. This means that even if he didn't come up with ideas himself, he could still tell the difference between good and bad when he saw it. He could praise the good and correct the bad in his assistant, so his assistant couldn't trick him and had to stay honest. To help a leader judge their servant, there's one test that never fails. If you notice the servant is more focused on their own interests than yours, and they're secretly looking out for their own gain in everything, that person will never be a good servant, and you won't be able to trust them. Someone who is responsible for another's affairs should never think about themselves, but always prioritize their leader and never get involved in things that don't concern the leader. On the flip side, to keep his servant honest, the prince should get to know him well, show him respect, reward him, do nice things for him, and involve him in both the honors and responsibilities. At the same time, the prince should make it clear that the servant can't succeed on his own. This way, the servant won't be tempted to seek more honors or wealth, and the responsibilities won't overwhelm him. When both servants and princes have this kind of relationship, they can trust each other. But if things are different, it will end badly for one or both of them. Chapter 23. Why you should avoid flatterers. I don't want to skip over an important part of this topic, because it's a real challenge for leaders to protect themselves from it, unless they're very careful and discerning. I'm talking about flatterers who are everywhere in royal courts. People tend to be so pleased with themselves and somewhat blinded by their own affairs that it's hard to avoid this problem. If leaders try to protect themselves from flatterers, they risk being disrespected. The only way to guard against flatterers is to make it clear that hearing the truth doesn't offend you. However, if everyone feels free to tell you the truth, it can lead to a loss of respect. A wise leader should take a balanced approach by choosing knowledgeable people in their circle and giving them the freedom to speak the truth, but only about the topics the leader asks about. The leader should ask them about everything, listen to their opinions, and then make their own decisions. With these advisors, both individually and as a group, the leader should act in a way that makes it clear the more openly they speak, the more valued they are. Beyond these advisors, the leader shouldn't listen to anyone else, should stick to the decisions made and remain firm in those choices. Anyone who does otherwise risks being misled by flatterers or becomes so indecisive due to conflicting opinions that they lose respect. I want to share a modern example on this topic. Fra Luca, who handles affairs for Maximilian, the current emperor, once said about him, "He never asks anyone for advice, yet he never gets his way with anything." This happens because he does the exact opposite of what he should. The emperor is very secretive. He doesn't share his plans with anyone or get their opinions. But when he starts to put these plans into action, they become obvious and known to everyone around him, and they immediately block him. Since he's easily swayed, he gets sidetracked by them. As a result, he ends up undoing what he did the day before. And nobody ever really knows what he wants or plans to do, so no one can count on his decisions. A prince should always seek advice, but only when he wants it, not when others try to give it. He should discourage anyone from offering advice unless he asks for it. However, he should be someone who constantly asks questions and then listens patiently to the answers. If he finds out that someone hasn't told him the truth for any reason, he should make sure they know he's upset about it. If some people think that a prince seems wise, not because of his own abilities, but because of the good advisors around him, they're definitely mistaken. There's a rule that never fails. A prince who isn't wise himself will never take good advice unless he has completely handed over his affairs to one very wise person. In that case, he might be well governed for a while, but it wouldn't last long because that advisor would soon take control of the state from him. But if a somewhat experienced leader takes advice from multiple people, they'll never get consistent advice, nor will they know how to bring it all together. Each advisor will have their own agenda, and the leader won't know how to manage or see through them. This is just how people are. They'll often be dishonest unless they're kept in check. So it can be concluded that good advice, no matter where it comes from, stems from the leader's wisdom, not the other way around. Chapter 24. Why the princes of Italy have lost their states. If a new ruler follows the previous advice carefully, they'll quickly seem well established and become more secure and stable in their position than if they had been there for a long time. People pay closer attention to the actions of a new ruler compared to one who inherited their position, and if the new ruler proves capable, they gain more followers and loyalty than old lineage ever could. This is because people are more interested in the present than the past, and if they find the current situation good, they enjoy it and don't look for anything else. They'll also defend a ruler fiercely if the ruler doesn't let them down in other ways. So it will be twice as impressive for a new ruler to establish a new leadership, enhance it with good laws, strong military, reliable allies, and a positive example. On the other hand, it will be twice as embarrassing for someone born into royalty to lose their position due to a lack of wisdom. If we look at the rulers who have lost their territories in Italy in recent times, like the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and others, we'll notice a common issue with their military strategies, as we've discussed before. Additionally, some of them either faced hostile populations or, if they had supportive people, they didn't know how to manage the nobles. Without these problems, states that have enough strength to maintain an army can't be lost. Philip of Macedon, not Alexander the Great's dad, but the one who got defeated by Titus Quintius, didn't have a lot of land compared to the massive power of the Romans and Greeks who went after him. Still, he was a skilled warrior who knew how to win over the people and keep the nobles on his side. He managed to hold off his enemies for many years. Even though he eventually lost control of some cities, he still kept his kingdom in the end. So our leaders shouldn't blame luck for losing their territories after holding on to them for so long. Instead, they should blame their own laziness. During peaceful times, they never considered that things might change. It's a common flaw in people to not prepare for tough times during the calm. When bad times finally hit, they thought about running away instead of defending themselves, hoping that the people, fed up with the conqueror's arrogance, would bring them back. This plan might work if all else fails, but it's a terrible idea to ignore all other options and just rely on that. You don't want to fail because you assumed someone would eventually come to your rescue. If that help does come, it won't be reliable because it doesn't depend on you. The only solutions you can truly count on are the ones that rely on your own efforts and abilities. Chapter 25. How Fortune Influences Our Lives and How to Handle It. I know that many people believe, and still believe, that the events of the world are controlled by fate and God, in such a way that human wisdom can't really influence them, and that no one can really help change them. Because of this belief, they think it's not necessary to put much effort into things, and that we should just let chance take its course. This idea has gained more traction in our time because of the significant and unpredictable changes we see happening every day. Sometimes, when I think about this, I find myself somewhat agreeing with them. However, I don't want to dismiss our free will entirely. I believe it's true that fortune controls half of our actions, but she still allows us to guide the other half, or maybe a little less. I compare her to one of those raging rivers that, when in flood, overflows the plains, sweeping away trees and buildings and carrying soil from place to place. Everything gets swept away, and nothing can withstand its force. But even though that's its nature, it doesn't mean that when the weather clears up, people shouldn't prepare with defenses and barriers. This way, when the waters rise again, they can flow through canals, and their power won't be as wild or dangerous. The same goes for fortune, which shows its strength where courage hasn't prepared to resist it, and it targets places where it knows there are no barriers or defenses to hold it back. If you take a look at Italy, which is where these changes started and gained momentum, you'll notice it's an open country without any natural barriers or defenses. If Italy had been defended with the same kind of strength as Germany, Spain, and France, either this invasion wouldn't have caused such major changes, or it might not have happened at all. I think that's enough to say about resisting fortune in general. Focusing more on specifics, I'd say that a prince can be happy today and ruined tomorrow without changing his attitude or character. I think this happens mainly because, as we've discussed before, a prince who relies solely on luck is doomed when it shifts. I also believe that success comes to those who adapt their actions to fit the times, while those who don't will fail. People aim for goals like glory and wealth in different ways. Some are cautious, others are quick. Some use force, others use skill. Some are patient, others are not. Each person can reach their goal using a different method. You might see two cautious people where one succeeds and the other doesn't, or two people using different approaches both succeed, one being cautious and the other impulsive. This all depends on whether their methods match the spirit of the times. As I mentioned, two people can work differently and achieve the same result, while two people working similarly might have different outcomes, with one succeeding and the other not. Summer changes come from this idea too. If someone who is careful and patient finds that circumstances align just right, their leadership will be successful and they'll be set for life. But if things change and they don't adapt, they'll fail. It's rare to find someone who knows how to adjust to change, partly because people tend to stick to what they're naturally inclined to do. Plus, if they've always succeeded by doing things a certain way, it's hard to convince them to try something new. So when a cautious person needs to take risks, they often don't know how, and that's their downfall. If they had just adapted their approach to fit the times, their luck wouldn't have run out. Pope Julius II tackled all his projects with impulsive energy, and the timing and circumstances always seemed to work in his favor, leading to his success. Take his first campaign against Bologna, for example, when Messer Giovanni Bentivogli was still alive. The Venetians weren't on board, nor was the King of Spain, and he was still negotiating with the King of France. Despite this, he boldly jumped into the expedition himself, which left Spain and the Venetians unsure and inactive. Spain because they wanted to reclaim Naples, and the Venetians out of fear. Meanwhile, he managed to pull in the King of France, who, seeing the Pope's bold move and wanting to ally with him to weaken the Venetians, couldn't say no. So, Julius achieved what no other pope relying on mere human wisdom could have done. If he had stayed in Rome, waiting to have everything perfectly planned out like any other pope might have, he would have failed. The King of France would have come up with countless excuses, and others would have been filled with endless doubts. I'll skip over his other actions, since they were all pretty much the same and successful. His life was too short for him to face any failures. But if he had ever needed to be cautious, he would have been in trouble because he wouldn't have strayed from his natural tendencies. In conclusion, since fortune is unpredictable and people tend to stick to their habits, as long as these two align, people succeed. But when they don't, success is elusive. Personally, I think it's better to be bold than cautious, because fortune is like a woman, and if you want to keep her under control, you need to be assertive and daring. It's clear that she tends to favor those who are adventurous over those who approach things more cautiously. Therefore, like a woman, she often prefers young men because they are less cautious, more intense, and more daring in commanding her. Chapter 26: A Call to Free Italy from the Barbarians. After thinking a lot about the topics discussed above, I started wondering if now is a good time for a new leader, and if there are factors that would allow a smart and virtuous leader to bring about a new order that would benefit both them and the people of this country. It seems to me that so many things are lining up in favor of a new leader that I've never known a time more suitable than right now. And if, like I mentioned, it was necessary for the people of Israel to be captive to show off Moses' abilities, for the Persians to be oppressed by the Medes to reveal Cyrus' greatness, and for the Athenians to be scattered to highlight Theseus' capabilities, then right now, to uncover the strength of the Italian spirit, It was necessary for Italy to be in the dire situation it's in today. Italy had to be more enslaved than the Hebrews, more oppressed than the Persians, more scattered than the Athenians, without leadership, without order, beaten, plundered, torn apart, overrun, and to have gone through every kind of devastation. Recently, there seemed to be someone who showed promise, making us think he was destined by God to save us. But later, at the peak of his journey, it became clear that luck wasn't on his side. So now, Italy, feeling lifeless, is waiting for someone who can heal her wounds and stop the destruction and looting in Lombardy, the deceit and heavy taxes in the kingdom and Tuscany, and clean up the long-standing issues. It's clear that Italy is pleading with God to send someone to free her from these injustices and barbaric acts. It's also obvious that she's ready and willing to rally behind a leader if only someone would step up and lead. Right now, there's no one else she can put more hope in than your esteemed family. Your family is known for its bravery and good fortune, blessed by God and the church which you're now leading. You could be the driving force behind this redemption. It won't be hard if you think about the actions and lives of the people I've mentioned. Even though they were amazing individuals, they were still just people, and they didn't have any more opportunities than you do now. Their missions weren't any more just or easier than this one, and God wasn't any more on their side than He is on yours. We have a strong sense of justice because a war is just when it's necessary, and weapons are sacred when there are only hope. We're incredibly willing, and when there's a lot of willingness, the challenges aren't as big if you just follow the people I've pointed out to you. On top of that, look at how amazingly God's ways have shown themselves. The sea has parted, a cloud has led the way, water has flowed from a rock, manna has rained down. Everything has contributed to your greatness. Now it's up to you to do the rest. God doesn't want to do everything for us, as that would take away our free will and the share of glory that's meant for us. It's no surprise that none of the Italians mentioned earlier have managed to achieve everything expected from your distinguished family. With all the changes and battles in Italy, it often seemed like military skill was running out. This happened because the old ways weren't effective, and none of us figured out how to create a new system. Nothing brings more honor to a person than creating new laws and systems when they're just starting out. When these are well established and respectable, they earn admiration and respect. In Italy, there are plenty of chances to put these into practice in every possible way. Here, people have great physical strength, but lack leadership skills. Take a close look at the duels and one-on-one fights. Italians are clearly superior in strength, skill, and cleverness. But when it comes to larger armies, they just don't measure up, and this is entirely because of poor leadership. Those who are capable don't follow orders, and everyone thinks they know best. There's never been anyone outstanding enough in either bravery or luck for others to follow. That's why, for so long, and after so much fighting in the past 20 years, whenever there's been an all-Italian army, it hasn't performed well. The first example of this is Il Taro, followed by Alessandria, Capua, Genoa, Vaila, Bologna, and Mestre. So, if your distinguished family wants to follow in the footsteps of those remarkable individuals who have saved their country, the first thing you need is your own forces. This is the true foundation for any endeavor, because there's no one more loyal, reliable, or better than your own soldiers. Individually they're great, but they'll be even better when they're led by their prince, respected by him, and supported financially. That's why it's essential to be equipped with such forces, so you can defend against outsiders with Italian strength. Even though Swiss and Spanish infantry are considered really tough, they both have weaknesses that a third type of infantry could exploit to not only stand up to them, but also potentially defeat them. The Spaniards struggle against cavalry, and the Swiss get nervous when facing infantry in close combat. We've seen this before, and might see it again. The Spaniards can't hold their ground against French cavalry, and the Swiss get beaten by Spanish infantry. While we can't fully prove the latter, there was some evidence at the Battle of Ravenna. There, Spanish infantry faced off against German battalions using Swiss tactics. The Spaniards, with their agility and shields, managed to get under the Germans' pikes and stayed out of harm's way, ready to attack while the Germans were stuck. If the cavalry hadn't charged in, the Germans would have been done for. So, knowing these weaknesses, it's possible to create a new type of infantry that can handle cavalry and isn't scared of infantry. This doesn't mean inventing a whole new kind of army, just tweaking the old one. These kinds of improvements can really boost the reputation and power of a new leader. We shouldn't let this chance slip by to finally let Italy see its liberator show up. You can't even describe the love he'd get from all those regions that have suffered so much from foreign invasions, the thirst for revenge, the unshakable faith, the devotion, and the tears. What door would be closed to him? Who would refuse to follow him? What jealousy would stand in his way? What Italian wouldn't honor him? We all can't stand this foreign rule. So let your distinguished house take on this mission with the courage and hope that all righteous causes deserve, so that under its banner our homeland can be uplifted, and under its guidance we can prove Petrarch's saying true. Virtue will stand strong against rage in the battle, and in the fight it will soon make them run away. The old Roman courage isn't gone, nor in the Italians' hearts extinguished. Edward Dacre, 1640.